Thank you. Good evening. Welcome everyone here, everyone joining online. Um, please could Democratic Services read out the housekeeping notice?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of your nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial. In the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of this meeting. For those in the room, that includes turning the microphone off and the volume completely down on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could you let me know any apologies and substitutions for this evening?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Councillor Phipps, Councillor Salmon and Councillor Trent, and we have Councillor Deadman for Councillor Phipps as a substitute.
Thank you and welcome, Councillor Deadman. I believe that Councillor Tarling and Councillor Slade are on their way, but they might be a little held up, so we should expect them to join us shortly. Now, before I go on, we have very sad news today about the death of Council Officer Kat Macmillan. And many of us are deeply saddened by that news. She stood out to me for her kindness, for her warmth, for her expertise and her generosity with that expertise, and her very clear love for her work and the community she served. And she stood out to me for that. And everyone I know is really deeply saddened by that news. And that's those of us who worked with her professionally. So I can't begin to imagine what those who knew her very well, her family, her friends, and those who worked closely with her, what they must be going through at this time. So I'm sure all of the committee would agree with me that our sincerest thoughts and condolences are with all of those who knew her well. So with that in mind, I'd like us to take a minute to reflect on that and as a sign of our respect. Thank you. So on behalf of all the committee, my deepest condolences and thoughts for her family, Chris, her sons, Riley and Joel, and all those grieving her at the moment. So please can we then move on to item number 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other interest on any items on the agenda? Thank you. So item number 4, confirmation of minutes. Now, this is the minutes for the meeting that we held in closed session, as well as the public part of that meeting. Do we have a mover and a seconder for that?
Motion is proposed.
Thank you, and Councillor Bartlett, happy to second that. Thank you. Do we have consensus to agree that? Thank you. Okay, recommendation and action tracker. So as I remind you, this action tracker is brought in, been a year now as an aid memoir for committee members. So just running through it, any actions that we can update. If any officers would like to update on any of them, please do so. There is an item on the progress against the report on the governance of Lower Central Gardens. It was raised by a committee member as to whether or not work was already commencing on that item. Is that something you're able to update on?
Yes, Chair. The report is on the forward plan for November, and the officers are aware of that, and they've scheduled that in and are fine with that timetable.
Thank you. Now, I had we had a discussion about the risks on the corporate risk register related to children's services. There is obviously one on the DSG deficit, and there's one on a more general one on safeguarding. So we've got an item on the action tracker for further information on the financial assumptions underpinning the SEND reform programme. Now, you might recall there was an all members briefing on the new SEND reform plan. That was a few weeks ago. So any council members that didn't make that, that is still available on the council website. So that might be a good start for us to inform ourselves on that SEND reform plan. But I'm going to ask the CFO, would you like to comment on whether or not there could be an additional briefing on the implications of that on the finances?
For you, Chair. I know this was discussed at a previous committee around getting perhaps into the detailed assumptions around the draft SEND reform plan, and it's draft because it hasn't been approved yet by government. There's an awful lot of assumptions and details behind it. It's a very detailed model, and I think it's just trying to work out how best we land that, be that in a committee space with a report or something that we do perhaps as a members briefing, perhaps outside of the sort of standard committee. So I'm happy to take suggestions and what would work best.
Thank you. Could you remind us on the timeline for that, and when might be a good point at which we could think about that?
So we've got all the detail in terms of the draft SEND reform plan, so we can do it now, so to speak, but it may change if government are not content with that reform plan. That's the risk to it. And we'll get confirmation by, hopefully, September, judging by their timeline.
Shall we take stock at the meeting in September? Well, the meeting's at the 3rd of September. You might not have news by then, but let's take stock then. That might be a time at which we could arrange perhaps a separate briefing. We've done a few briefings online for committee members. That might be something that we could offer, unless you decide to do something for all members, in which case that's superseded. Thank you for that. Carter's Key, all of those actions I'm hoping to bring to the next appropriate meeting. We have a new monitoring officer starting on Monday, and he will obviously want to be closely apprised of that. I'm sure it will be a big feature of his of his new what do you call it, an induction, is getting up to speed on issues. I'm sure that will be on his radar. So in consultation with him, we'll bring it to the next appropriate meeting. Did anyone have any comments on any of the other items on the action tracker before we move on? On item 49, this is a corporate risk register related to children's services. So as I said, I think that we don't need an extra special meeting on the DSG grant, because as we said, there's now a draft SEND reform plan. We can look at that in isolation. Regarding the wider risks around safeguarding, I think the most effective way of doing that would be to invite an officer from Children's Services to come to one of our corporate risk register discussions and just speak to that risk through those discussions, rather than organising something. So we've invited her to come to the next risk register discussion. All right. Unless any other comments, let's move on to item number 5, public issues. So do we have any public questions, statements or petitions that have been submitted?
Yes, we've received one public question and 4 public statements. If I could invite Mr. McKinstry to come up and read his question.
Mr. McKinstry, welcome. When you're ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right, first of all? I shall commence. In January 2026, just after the Christmas Tree Wonderland event decamped from the lower gardens, I asked for a copy of the contract with the events company and received an incomplete document. During the recent public inspection of accounts, I requested the absent parts of that document and was told the contract has still to be finalised. It seems, therefore, that the events company traded in the Lower Gardens in 2025 to 2026 without a finalised contract. Why is this not included in the report for item 12 as a breach of the financial regulations? In particular, Part G Regulation 30, contract implementation, Part G Regulation 32, contract management, and Part G Regulation 2, Sub-Regulation H, protect the council from any loss arising from the failure of the contractor to perform the contract. The last one is absolutely vital. How can a supplier be held to account if the contract with the supplier is still being finalised?
Thank you. There was no breach of financial regulations in relation to the Christmas Tree Wonderland. Following open advertising, a contract award letter was sent by the council to the proposed contractor on the 23rd of December 2024. In this letter, the following wording was stated: until a formal written contract is prepared and executed, the invitation to tender, your response to it, any relevant bid clarifications, the terms and conditions included within the tender, and this signed award letter will constitute a binding contract between us. The award letter was duly signed by the proposed contractor on the 6th of January 2025. As an aside, this process is followed for all council contract awards. The council uses this approach as a valid legal backstop before entire understanding contracts are relied upon.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And public statements.
Thank you, Chair. So we've received 4 public statements, 3 statements from Ian Redman in relation to agenda item 12 and 1 in relation to agenda item 15, and then 1 from Philip Gattrell, which I'll be reading out. So the first statement from Ian Redman: a procurement decision record contains numerous declarations, approvals, sign-offs and tick boxes, creating the impression of a rigorous process. However, good governance depends on the quality of scrutiny, not the quantity of paperwork. The example I reviewed raises concerns about whether basic due diligence is being undertaken. The PDR contains no requirement to verify a supplier's legal identity, consider the origin of goods, or assess any associated supply chain risks. These are straightforward checks that could help identify potential issues before public money is committed, yet they do not form part of the documented approval process. I also note that the Chief Financial Officer approval appears to be sought by email for multiple PDRs simultaneously, raising concerns that the approval process may become procedural rather than demonstrating that each procurement has received meaningful and independent scrutiny. And then this is the second statement from Ian Redman. The Future Places investigation examined the procurement of Smart Growth Associates. The procurement decision record could not be located despite PDRs being individually numbered, centrally recorded and circulated to multiple officers and subject to Chief Financial Officer approval. The meeting papers describe procurement breaches as the actions of individual officers. However, in practice, procuring goods or services and authorising payments require multiple approval by senior officers and finance before public money is released. Governance controls are intended to prevent errors or non-compliance reaching that stage. If procurement failure can still occur, it raises concerns about whether those controls are operating effectively or whether approvals have become procedural rather than providing challenge and accountability. Given that breaches are generally identified through self-reporting or internal audit, it also raises the question of how many procurement failures may remain undetected, as occurred with the missing Smart Growth Associates PDR. And then the third statement from Ian Redman in regards to agenda item 15. The draft annual governance statement states that the Council provides information in a timely manner to support transparency and accountability. My experience during the 2025-26 inspection of accounts was different. I requested accounting records needed to exercise my statutory rights as a local government elector, yet most requests remain unanswered by the end of the inspection period, limiting scrutiny of the accounts. I subsequently submitted an objection under Section 27 of the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014 to the external auditor. If electors cannot obtain accounting information within the statutory inspection period or effectively exercise their legal right, I question whether the annual governance statement fairly reflects the Council's governance arrangements and ask the committee to consider whether this should be reported as a significant governance issue. And then the final statement from Philip Grattrell in regards to agenda item 14 and agenda item 15. Accountability requires statutory red flag reporting to discern the proverbial wood for the trees in the council's published information. During July, I provided this committee with an incontrovertible relevant law associated significant issues omitted by the 2025-26 draft annual governance statement, which includes identified in previous public issues but still unfulfilled is the monitoring officers anathema of the 1989 Act, Section 5 and Section 5A, reporting of likely and actual material contraventions of law to each member. Similarly, concerning Ombudsman determined report of failure. And exemplified via the Ombudsman 1974 Act maladministration report upheld by judicial review, the Constitution's flawed wording incorrectly implies when presented to Cabinet the report, already considered by the committee, satisfies all members 1989 Act right of awareness, demonstrably failing freedom of information processes characterised by the 2025-26 first tier tribunal decision, Council's 2014 Act deadline contravention regarding the 2025-26 response where otherwise incomplete information defines Section 5 reportably inadequate asset records.
Thank you very much. So, item number 6, External Auditor, Regaining Assurance Progress Report and Sector Update. And for this, I'd like to invite Ros Appley from Grant Thornton. Hi, I'm happy to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Yes, so we've got 2 reports on the agenda today that are both closely linked. They're both relating to regaining assurance, so I'll go through that. But first, we just wanted to provide a bit of a verbal update on audit progress so far. So as we made you aware of at the last committee meeting, we were starting our detailed accounts audit work at the end of last month. So we've had about a month working on the audit so far, and we have made some really, really good progress. It's vital that we keep up this momentum over the coming months because, as we spoke about at the last committee, we are working towards the end of November this year, so a couple of months earlier than last year. So there is a lot to do in a shorter time period. So it's vital that the continued efforts that we've seen over the last months continue and that the quality of evidence remains as it is and that queries are responded to in a timely way. But at the moment, we're very happy with the progress that we've made and things are moving well, and we've been able to get a large number of samples out and a lot of responses back as well. So we're feeling in a really positive position at the moment. The rest of the reports is largely kind of focusing on the regaining assurance piece. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the last few audit opinions have been disclaimed because of the backstop that occurred on the audit in 2022-23, which ultimately resulted in a disclaimed audit opinion because we couldn't complete our audit work in a number of areas. There was only 1 year for the council where we couldn't undertake full audit work. However, that disclaimed opinion rolls forward because us not undertaking full audit procedures in 22-23 means we don't have assurance over reserves and a few other areas. Over the recent months, there's been lots of conversations within the audit practice and coming out of guidance from MHCLG that we need to start looking at how we're going to regain assurance over the kind of the sector as a whole. So what this report does is kind of sets out what we think that position looks like for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, and how we can do that and the timeline that we can do that within. I'm not going to go into loads and loads of details because it's all in the report, and I'll take it as read. But I guess the key things to highlight are that the timeline we're hoping to look at kind of being back to that unmodified opinion is by the end of 2027-28. What that will mean from kind of the end of 2026 to the end of 2028 is that there will be additional work that we'll have to do. We'll have to do some additional work on PPE, we'll have to do additional work on journals, we'll have to do a lot of additional work on reserves to get us into that position where we feel comfortable and we are satisfied over those balances, so we can issue that unmodified opinion. You will also note within the report, I think it's on page 40, actually I think it's 55, sorry, we make note to BCP being in a kind of category B. So we have categories A, B, C and D. A is those where we see there's the smallest number of barriers, and then D being there's lots of barriers. So for the council, we do see there's a couple of barriers, particularly related to journals and access. So there are things that might make this more difficult, and we need to work closely with the finance team to work out how we can get access and do everything we need to do to be in that position. But we do see that largely the council is in a good position to regain assurance, and those councils that can't do that are kind of being pushed down the line. But being in a clean position is where we want all of our councils to be, and hopefully it's where the council wants to be as well. But it's vital that we work really closely together over the kind of coming months and years to get to that position. We've had sort of several conversations with key officers around that, but those conversations will just be kind of ramping up towards the end of the year. Wasn't going to say anything else on that, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, and that's really reassuring to get that update mid-year on progress, and good to hear that that exchange is going well. It's obviously disappointing not to get the unqualified audit by the end of 20. Did you say 27-28?
27-28 will be unqualified. Probably in 26-27 it will be qualified, but it's likely to be an except for qualification because it will just be the comparator balances that we don't have assurance over. So a step in the right direction, but yes.
And the one thing that did stand out to me in the report was not looking at reserves for a number of years in full, and I'm interested in the rationale for why that would be lower down the list of what you looked at. It strikes me as there's a risk there of the reserves, the council's reserves, not being what we think they are. Is that something that's across councils?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reserves normally comes last because ultimately everything else feeds into that reserves balance. So if we don't have assurance over anything else, effectively it feeds through to that reserves balance. So it kind of comes through in the wash in part. The reserves work through doing other bits of work in PPE, journals, everything else. But there's also, it's the biggest part of work that you have to do around reserves. So how we see this working is that if we can kind of find resource in early 2027, we would start some of that reserves work. It just wouldn't be complete until a year later because of the amount we'd have to do. So we would be starting that work, it just wouldn't be fully concluded. And it links into kind of the timings of everything and the amount of work we have to do to ensure we have capacity on our side, but also that relevant people within the council have a break from audit and can focus on the day job, because we can't work on BCP all year, but also they probably can't work with us all year round because it's just not realistic.
Thank you, and that makes sense. I suppose it makes sense for it not to be a complete audit until after you've done everything else, but presumably any earlier work would identify if there's a significant difference in what we would expect in that. So I think Councillor Cox wanted to come in and then.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody is absolutely fundamentally aware of the fact that we all accounts work on a double entry bookkeeping system, and therefore the reserves are just the other end of another transaction. The other transaction tends to be in the assets and liabilities of a set of accounts. So on the basis that you are doing a full audit of the assets and liabilities, surely the reserves figures just fall out, have to be the other side. I do appreciate you do have to do some work on journals to do with reserves. I completely understand that, but I'm just failing to understand the intense work you seem to be implying that's going into reserves.
Of course, absolutely. So the issue comes because after the 22-23 audit year, in 23-24, we would have gained assurance over those in-year balances, that in-year expenditure, but we would have no assurance over that opening balance position. And we have never undertaken any work to gain that assurance over that opening balance. So that is where the issue lies. And that's kind of where this build back work needs to focus on to get us to that position. And the purpose, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, I will, except for the fact that you will have done some work on the opening balance, because you'll have done the previous years, and all you're looking at is the difference between the previous years and that year. So it's not entirely correct to say you can't rely on the opening reserves, because you've done the previous years to that. So you're just looking at the difference between the two, presumably.
So I'm not 100% sure I completely follow, so I can try to give an answer there, and if I don't address it, please come back. So in 22-23, we don't have assurance over the year at all. It was a qualified opinion, and therefore effectively we have no assurance over those year-end closing balances at March 2023, which then means that we don't have assurance over the opening balances. We have assurance over the in-year transactions within 23-24, but that has a knock-on effect of meaning we don't have assurance over the closing position. And that's kind of where it rolls forward, is that ultimately each year that moves forward, you're getting closer, but we're not there. And I'm just trying to see on which page of the packs there might be kind of the illustrative example, but on page 57 of your packs, it helps to set out, like in a RAG rating, the color coding of when those assurances come back. But for some years, the rework on it is longer. So obviously things that sit within the income and expenditure is much easier because they're in-year transactions. The issue is over those balance sheet items, PPE in particular. Pensions has kind of dropped out because there's been a triennial valuation, but some of those things just don't fall out the loop because of 5-year valuation cycles and the way things are done.
I think I'll leave it there, because I'd like a discussion at some point, probably with yourself or Barry, just to sort of understand that further. But one further question, if you don't mind, Chair. You mentioned about we were in category B, I think.
Yes.
How many are in category A?
I don't have that kind of information. There are a number within category A, but there are also a lot within category B, and we also have a reasonable proportion within C and D. So we have a range over all of those different areas within Grant Thornton and within the sector as a whole.
Speaking personally, I'd quite like to know what the proportions of councils lie in each sector, to be honest.
Okay, I'll see if we can get access to that information, because I'm sure it's something we have. It's just if I can get hold of it and if we're able to share it. But of course, I can find out if we can get that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Yeah, in your sector updates, which is page 39 of our agenda pack, you mentioned about the councillors should go on a webinar, but obviously that date was the 2nd of July. The question is, are you repeating that webinar in August, or did you do a recording of that webinar? And if you did do a recording, perhaps through the officers, the members of the committee could be sent a link to it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, on that one, I can find out. I think it will be very similar to one that's already been held that people may well have attended, but I can find out if there's likely to be another one, because completely appreciate that. And sorry, we didn't notice that before.
Mr. Filmer.
Through you, Chair. I won't dwell too much on the 22-23 reserve piece, but as I often say when the auditors present their findings, they're accounting adjustments ordinarily in terms of the impact on reserves. So they do not impact on what we call our usable reserves, what we've actually got at our disposal to deliver services. So just trying to give you some assurance around when we talk about they haven't looked at reserves, it tends to be around those accounting adjustments. One bit in the report just to draw out on the 22-23 year, since then we've implemented a new finance system so that we don't have the same accessibility that we ordinarily would on the system we have at the moment, particularly around journal access and things like that. We've got data, as you'd expect, but it's not of the same accessibility as it would be ordinarily. And of course, we've lost key staff over that course as well, so knowledge has departed the organisation as well, particularly on some testing. One other bit, just to jump back, because it's a success, and I don't have many successes, just to draw out, that we delivered the draft statement of accounts on the 12th of June. The deadline is the 30th of June. That is very rare for local authorities, particularly of our size, to draw together such a complex set of accounts by that time frame to allow the audit to hopefully be completed by November. And that's down to the work of Russell and team to get that. So I think that was worth noting.
And can I add that Barry told me that we were the first council to present their accounts. Don't know whether that's true or not.
Thank you. I mean, I did want to say I was fully expecting this update to be all the reasons why it's going to be delayed and pushed back, and it's more difficult than I thought. So it's absolutely incredible work that it's on track on all accounts. So well done to the team. Please pass that on to everyone involved. It's looking positive for the regaining assurance piece and this year's deadline, which we knew was challenging. Thank you very much. Can I just add, I'd like to be involved if you do have a catch up, Councillor Cox, on that matter about understanding the reserves. I'd be keen to. This was a question I remember raising the first time we found out it was going to be a disqualified opinion about the knock-on impact there. So understanding that more, I'd like to be involved if that would be appropriate. Right. Does anybody else have any more questions? Like Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, just a very quick one. On page 55, the audit report trajectory for 27-28 is said to be unqualified. I don't understand what the difference between unqualified and unmodified is.
So that was what I made reference to very briefly in response to another question. So that the unqualified shows where effectively we are saying the accounts are true and fair, and there's no modification to the audit opinion, where in 26-27 we are saying there is a potential qualification that is less severe than the disclaimed opinion that we have been issued, because the only thing we are reporting there is that it's because of the comparator figures. So we're saying we don't have assurance over the comparators. So in effect, it's kind of a less severe, and I've spoken about the kind of we're moving in the right direction. So it just shows you're kind of one step closer to getting to that unqualified opinion.
And my understanding is it's a full audit, but they don't have assurance that the starting position is right. So it until you've got a number of years and work backwards, you're not gonna. Yeah, I understand. It's frustrating, but it looks like the work's going so well. All right, thank you so much. Look forward to you coming back to us in, I think it's November, I think, but speak to you then. Thank you so much.
Chair.
Right, let's move on to item 7, Treasury Management Outturn Report and Q1 Update. And for this, we welcome Russell Oakley, who is, I don't want to say the new Matt, but he is interim assistant CFO, who's obviously done a lot of the work we've heard about already. So welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'll start with this update with the update on the economic changes since the last update report that came through in January. I think the main global issue since then has been the conflict in the Middle East, which has had a effect around the world. It's had a big impact on our treasury management from the perspective of interest rates, which we expected to be cut around March. That cut didn't happen, so they've remained at 3.75% since then. The last three now monetary policy committees have held that rate, with a couple of people voting to increase, as opposed to the previous direction that we were expecting further cuts. Longer term, they're still expecting rates to fall. We're expecting rates to fall now to around 3.5% by the end of 2027, and potentially to 3.25% by spring 2028, subject to those global events. Inflation has also taken a bit of a turn. Inflation was falling to around 2.8% until March. Then April and May started to rise. There's also a bit of a delay expected on energy price impact. We're expected to see inflation rise to around 3.6% by the end of this year, but longer term, the forecast is that inflation will fall back towards the 2%, driven by a weaker labour market and a soft economic backdrop. There's been fluctuations on the gilt market as well, which is very closely linked to our PWRB market, and they remain significantly higher than the Bank of England base rate for PWRB borrowing. If everyone's happy there, I'll move on to the outturn positions, which was in line with forecast for 25-26. We had underspend of 1.1 million, primarily because we were able to continue to borrow from the local authority markets, as opposed to when we set the budget, we anticipate having to take out PWRB borrowing, which would have been a higher interest rate. Of that, there's an increased interest receivable amount because we were borrowing ahead of time in some respects, so we made sure that we reduced the risk of low cash in March. That meant we had more to invest, but because we were paying lower rates, we also have a positive variance on our interest payable as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. That was clear. So the volatility seems to be a continued feature. You were expecting to come down, rates to come down again, and then there was the conflict in the Middle East. Do you have a management strategy of protecting the treasury management, protecting from volatility as kind of something you're conscious of doing aside from the usual treasury management strategy? That doesn't make too much sense the way I put it. I think if you're expecting volatility to continue, presumably that would influence your treasury management strategy in today's world. Is that something that's kind of consciously done, or is that just part of your day-to-day management?
I guess we try and look at that landscape, and we take guidance from specific consultants that we work with to look at those longer term forecasts. Ultimately, those longer term forecasts changed overnight with the events in the Middle East, so that is our protection to an extent. We feed these into our budget setting, but when they do change, they're our best assumptions at that time.
Thank you. I think we have Councillor Slade.
Thank you. It's on a similar topic, just to put this into layman's terms, because that's where I work, is looking at table 4 and table 10, the short-term borrowings. There's an awful lot of money, 187 million as far as I could tell, and then another big number that have either just matured or are about to mature. If you were expecting, and we as a nation were expecting interest rates to come down, where will we find the assessment for the next financial year about replacing these borrowings? Because this isn't borrowing we're repaying, this is borrowing that we recycle, isn't it? So if we're recycling it and the rate hasn't come down and we thought it was going to, how does that impact our medium-term financial plan?
That creates a pressure, and that's where we're looking at the budget, and we're setting a budget at a certain interest rate, but that hasn't come down, so that creates a pressure potentially in a year.
So to just push on that a little bit, you must have done, not necessarily you, the department must have done a number crunch that says if you take table 4, 187 million pounds worth of short-term borrowing that has expired, and we had assumed that we're going to be paying X amount, someone must already have done the numbers that says X has now become Y. Where will we find in publicly available information how much difference that is? Because you can say it's a pressure, but a pressure could be a pressure that means that we can't do stuff, or it could just be an accounting number. So how do I find, as a member of the public, that information, and can you tell us what that number is?
We are forecasting that, but we've got another unknown around the Send Recovery grant. So we were talking about the recovery plan and the update in September. So potentially in October, we could receive 90% of our DSG deficit. That also wasn't budgeted, because at the time we set that budget in January, it was another unknown. Hence the in-year forecast is that we'll come out on budget. If that Send graft is received in October, although we're having to pay higher interest rates on the borrowing than we anticipated, we then have to borrow less for the remainder of the year, so we come under budget.
I'm really sorry. I realise this is your first audit meeting and we can be a bit tricky, but I sort of don't care about that, because that's a different box altogether. Well, I absolutely care about that, but I don't care about it for this moment, because there has to be a number that says £187,000. I don't know. Let's be really simplistic. £187 million. Let's say that we're paying £2 million a year of interest on that. If that £2 million has become £3 million, you'll know that. Where do I, as a member of the public, see that 1 million? Because I accept that we're going to get something else in a few months' time, but that's for a discussion then. This is for a discussion now, and I know that this is new. I'm hoping someone on that side can actually give me the answer, because I think we need it.
Yeah, Mr. Filmer.
Through you, Chair. So if you look at table 3 for the outturn of 25-26, okay, when we set the budget for 25-26, we made an assumption about what interest rates would be.
Yes.
Say 4%. I'm not sure if that's the case. That also assumes cash balances across the year, because we have ups and downs on cash. Interest rates change in terms of what we assume. Cash balances change in terms of what we assume. What you see on table 3 is that end position based on what we budgeted for, and then what actually happened in terms of interest received and interest payable. So for in-year monitoring, you need to look at table. Down a bit more, because it's quite a long report. Table 9, which is the in-year forecast for 26-27. Now, the forecast is 0, and the reason it's 0 is it's very, very hard to predict where we are with cash at the moment. But not only are we managing a portfolio of 209 million of short-term borrowing that we are recycling and going out to market, but come October, the government are going to release £5 billion worth of cash at some point, potentially, maybe more, maybe less. That in itself is just going to completely change the landscape in terms of cash that's in the local authority market and also ours. And we might not even receive that money in October. We might receive it in April next year. So it's very difficult at the moment in terms of that sort of prediction. But hopefully that gives you some type of idea about where you see that kind of projection.
So table 3 suggests that just by pure fluke, my numbers were right. The variance in the interest paid on the long-term and short-term borrowings in 25-26 was 1.129 million by pure fluke. But by the time we get to table 9, that figure is 0. I don't understand how, if we know one to be fact, i.e. the variance is 1.129 million, and by the time we get to table 9, we've actually said interest paid on short-term borrowings is exactly the same. I get that we've got other things that are going to happen, but if the fact of the matter is it was 1.129 million, why isn't it a variance of 1.129 million that you then say, oh, actually, there's going to be an adjustment elsewhere? It feels like there's a missing line in that graph. I'm clearly not understanding it, but if I'm not, then I'm sure there are other people.
For you, Chair, and just the distinction between table 3 and table 9. Table 3 is the actual outturn for 25-26, so what actually happened. Table 9 is the forecast, what we're estimating to be at the end of the year. 2 different years. Just to paint a picture around cash balances, we're burning through about £100 million worth a year on the dedicated school grant. Again, that just blows out in terms of us trying to forecast that level of spend on our cash. It's a very tricky area in order to be able to have really, drilled down forecasts in this area.
So can I just check my understanding? You don't track at that level of precision in year on that kind of quarter to quarter because there is so much movement in the cash. But at the end of the year, you will be able to do that piece saying, this is what we thought, this is what we did, but with that context of what we know. Is that right?
We track it monthly, so we'll know where we actually are at the end of July coming. But that we also then need to forecast what that will look like by the end of the year. And that's the tricky part because there's so many moving parts between now and the end of the financial year.
So we could see a monthly tracker for where it's looking every month,
yes.
But there's an extra piece of work required to accurately forecast the end of the year. And the DSG is relevant because that's such a big part of that picture. Okay.
And that will appear in the quarterly accounts when you get your quarterly.
But we know that there is going to be, there is always a variance between what you expected to happen with borrowing and what actually happens. There's always that variance, but you're expecting it might be significant this year because of the change of the difference in rates than expected. We just don't know exactly how much because of that extra piece of work needed. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just picking up a point you made there, Mr. Fulmer, about obviously when the money comes in for the DSG, obviously we're not unique. Other councils will, in theory, have the same money. Where we are borrowing between local authorities, that surely there'll be a surplus of authorities sort of paying off debts. Are we hoping that effect will repress the Public Works loan board rate? Because I notice in your tracker in the base rate, the PWRB is constantly ratcheting up, whereas the base rate is sort of doing that. Are we hoping that there'll be some drop on that? Is that the way that we think it's going to go?
So for you, Chair, I think my personal view of it would be the government need to find, before October, £5 billion worth of cash to distribute to government, to local government. My view, that would push up PWB rates because they're suddenly going out to the market saying we need all this cash in quite a short period of time to distribute. What we might find is it might push down the rates in the local authority market where we borrow from for a period, but it's short-lived because we're burning through that cash at such a rate that we might be investing for a couple of weeks, but that money won't stay invested for very long because we'll be back out to the market to borrow.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at table 4, council's borrowings, and I see that we've got a total of £15 million borrowed from 2 separate police and crime commissioners. Bearing in mind they're going to be done away with May 2028, presumably we're going to have to give back that money because they'll want their money back because they're going to be wound up. And as an aside, obviously, if these police and crime commissioners are lending money, other ones as well all over the country, there's going to be quite a lot of money going to the government once they wound them up. But, you know, are we conscious of the fact that we've got to get out of those borrowings over the next, well, less than 2 years?
For you, Chair. So often would have paid those monies back in that period, depending if they've matured in that period, or they'll novate to a new entity, which is what happened when we had LGR in this area, that it will novate to the next entity that picks it up.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. Yeah, I've sort of been asked by Councillor Tarling, but I wondered why there was this huge, you know, opening gap between the base rate and the PWLB rate, which seems to be over the last 2 years is an extraordinary difference. Whereas before it always used to track the base rate, but now it doesn't. What's the reason for that? I think you touched on it just now, didn't you? It depends how much money the government needs.
That one for you.
Yeah, I don't know if Russell wants to join in, but it is quite a wide economic discussion that you could end up having, I think, in terms of why this is. I think some of it is around the reflection of the markets and their view on government's ability to manage their finances.
Okay.
And their nervousness around it, which means that they are charging more for government to go out and pick up debt effectively. But we are an outlier globally in terms of the UK, but we do see it in other large economies that it is higher than the base rate of you know, their respective central banks.
Okay, that sort of leads me into the next question, if I may, Chair. And it's about the long-term borrowings, which is essentially PWLB borrowings. And I maybe a stupid question, I'm sorry, but I wanted to know how these are just interest loans, aren't they? So how do you accumulate the money to pay it back at the end? Because take for example the HRA pool, £42 million during 2026. That's a huge lump of money that's got to be paid back at some point. You know, would you borrow money again? So, you know, that, and I think that sort of touches on the point that Councillor Slade made. You know, if the interest rates are that much higher, you know, what the impact on the general account in terms of the revenue, having to, you know, pay increased interest charges on that level of repayment. It's so. I mean, what's a normal process? Do you just wait until the maturity date and then see if you need to refinance it in some way? So does this debt ever really get paid off? Does it ever get any smaller?
Are you okay to answer this? It's getting quite philosophical.
It depends. Let's start with the HRA as an example. So, and that's where a large majority of the council's debt sits within the housing revenue account, and their debt is what they call a maturity debt. So we're just paying interest, and then at the end of the term, we have to repay back the full amount. The HRA makes an assumption in their business plan, their 30-year business plan, that they are setting money aside to repay that when that money's due. But conditions change. It might be they need to refinance it. So that the HRA, that's their kind of the plan around that. The general fund, I think, will be and the debt there will be depending on its cash position at that point in time. But we have to, in the general fund, it's different to the HRA, we have to set money aside every year in revenue to effectively pay that debt down. We're ring-fencing cash. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks. I've got one more question if I can find the table, and it related to, oh yeah, I think so. It's the graph, the DSG total debt, looking against the total debt, and you've got a line about the DSG deficit versus total debt, and the DSG deficit line is sort of going up in line more or less with the amount of total debt. Now, is that the FG deficit really debt? Is it just because you're not borrowing money to fund the cash flow for the DSG, are you? You're just using money that you've got. Oh, you are borrowing money. Okay, well, that then leads me to the next question. Are you allowed to borrow money to pay revenue expenditure? So why does it appear there?
Through you, Chair. Lots of difficult questions, and that one is an argument we've had with central government around the rules that traditionally councils cannot borrow to fund revenue expenditure. It's kind of a no, but the actual legislation around borrowing is slightly looser in terms of, and we've had these discussions with central government around it, and we pushed for obvious reasons because we'd like this resolved, and they came back and said, no, what you're doing is within the law, effectively.
If everybody remembers, at the time, it was a very difficult decision we had to make, actually, to borrow money to fund the DSG grant, and there was a lot of people very anxious about that, including myself. And we had to get letters specifically from the minister. We got letters from the auditor to make sure that we were in the clear on this, and we were given an exemption at the time because, oh no, don't worry about it. It's just temporary. You're only having to do it temporary because next year we're going to sort it all out. And that was and that exemption, it's only temporary, we're going to sort it all out, has been extended. And to be fair, the government, that's what the government has done, because they're saying 90% of it we're going to repay you, providing you do X, Y, Z. But obviously we've still got the 10%. But if you remember, it was a couple of years ago now. We were very exercised, and I was certainly very exercised about the fact that we were going to have to borrow money. And I remember having long conversations with the previous CFO about it, and we had to get assurances from the minister and from the auditor that we were okay to do this.
I'd always been under the obviously misunderstanding that because we were cash flowing it, we basically didn't have that money available in our account to earn interest. And so that line that you see, that red line, it was effectively the same as what we were losing by not having that money to invest. Is that another way of looking at the same thing?
For you, yeah, it is. And to sort of put some figures to it, so for 26-27, £10.5 million worth of interest payable can be associated with us servicing DSG deficit. So that's the sort of scale. You add in what the loss of income that could have been, in terms of investment, it could be more.
It's very sobering, isn't it? I think that's everything on that item, and that's been a really good discussion from our perspective, so thank you. Sorry for the difficult questions, but it's good to give the Treasury Management Report good attention at times, so thank you so much, and again thank you for that continuing work that's going on. All right, item 8, Risk Management Corporate Risk Register Update. I believe we have Fiona Manton joining online to speak to this one. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. This is the quarterly update to the Committee of the Council's Corporate Risk Register. You'll be aware that a new risk management policy was approved earlier in the year, and we are now in the implementation phase. This includes a number of tasks, including the refinement of enterprise risks and considering enterprise risk appetite. Developing in these areas, or developments rather in these areas, are included later on in this report. We continue to report in detail on corporate risk to this committee. It might be helpful to add that nothing is set in stone in terms of our reporting arrangements, and changes can be made to suit the committee's needs in terms of satisfying and receiving a suitable level of assurance in relation to the risk management framework. As part of this quarter's update, I've included a summarised version of the risk management process we follow. So this is included as Appendix 1 on page 81 of your pack. And to further support you in the approach to the Council's risk management, Appendix 2 on page 83, I've included the risk matrix and the definitions that we're currently using. The matrix we use is a 4x4 matrix, and we assess and map likelihood and impact. The basis of the assessment in terms of impact is provided by the definitions on page 84, with the likelihood being outlined on page 85. The assessment, you'll note, is based on 7 possible aspects of the risk, and this encourages multiple risk factors to be considered to ensure the full implications of risk are understood and evaluated. This encourages an accurate scoring and takes into account all risk impacts. The register you see here today is the Corporate Risk Register, and in relation to this quarter updates, to assist the committee, at paragraph 13 of the report on page 77, the material updates to the risks are outlined. Reflecting on the dynamic nature of the risks, I would ask that you note this review for the quarter was undertaken in late June, so some risks will have been subject to change since this update was completed. In terms of the updates I'd like to draw to your attention, particularly risk CR8. This was included during the previous quarters, and it's quite usual for us to bring this risk on when we're running any forms of elections or referendums, and then it's de-escalated back down to a service level risk once those referendums or elections take place. In relation to CR24, this was a risk which was previously shared by the Director of Public Health and Communities and the Director of Housing and Public Protection. The single lead has now been apportioned for this risk, which really doesn't mean there's any difference in terms of the update, but it does give one lead officer responsibility. As part of the continuing review of risk, at the review point for the register, we asked CMB to consider a newly nominated risk around corporate health and safety / asset management, and the CMB agreed to the inclusion on the risk register, and the interim director of finance has been appointed as the lead for that particular risk. So we're in the process of designing this risk at the moment, in putting it together and articulating it, and once that drafting is complete, we will bring it in the next report to this committee. The corporate risk register is shown at Appendix 4, starting on page 89, and as I mentioned before, this is a snapshot in time. As part of the continuing development of risk management processes, work is now underway to implement the new policy arrangements. So the initial enterprise risks were included in the original risk management policy. These have now been reviewed and refined, and risk leads identified for each. This is shown at Appendix 6 on page 157 of your reports pack. This has been a helpful development because we can now start the alignment of the risks. So in the background to this, the risk app where we record all risks is being updated and developed to include this new risk level, and the deployment of that is planned for September. So certainly for the next meeting of this group, I'd hope to be able to provide a more of an update on that, and you'll start to see the alignment of risks in and around the new enterprise level. We continue to monitor and circulate risk information as set out on paragraph 33 on page 79, and circulate that to services to try and horizon scan and have early warning of risk areas that we need to be aware of. Those are the areas I wanted to bring to your attention, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present my report to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really clear and really helpful. So who would like to start? I think Councillor Slade, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm a simple soul.
Keep saying that.
But as far so this, I preface that because I have read the report. But if you look at Appendix 3, it just feels slightly surprising that not a single one of the risks on the risk register has shifted at all. I accept that there's a direction of travel is even, but not one of them has moved one number over 4 quarters. Interestingly, when you then look at, Alex, we should talk, look at Appendix 4, there is a target risk score on a lot of them that is lower, which suggests to me that we are not satisfied with the risk of at least half of those corporate risks. And yet, over the course of a year, none of them have actually moved. Now, dig into the detail and there's commentary and stuff, but surely you'd expect something to have moved at some point during the whole year. And my final comment on that is, I'm quite surprised that on the whole risk register, the chief executive only holds one risk.
I would like to add to that. That was very much the theme of my comments, which is that effectively these are tolerate risks, right? They're not treat. These are being tolerated to something you could challenge. So I was hoping today we might go through a few of them and see if there are any what the decision point would be to decide that they can be de-escalated now. So the DSG, if 90% of that is being paid off, surely that should shift the dial a bit on that risk. Okay, the risk hasn't gone away. There is still a spending pressure. I know Councillor Cox wanted to keep that on there, but the quantum of that risk is so materially different. At some point, that's got to come down somehow. Similarly, cliff management instability, we just agreed 1.4 million in reserves to be spent on cliff management. Now, if that's not going to shift the dial at all, then we need to, that's a big issue, right? If that's a, that should be flagged if that's not going to. And then there was one other which is which stood out to me as something that surely that there should be some positive movement there. So perhaps others want to come in with that, and then we can go through them. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is to partially answer. Sorry, Fiona, to sort of eat one of your sandwiches or have a nibble off the corner at least, is because of the impact and where we've got these headline large impact risks. I think they're always going to be high because you've got that impact rating which is set by band of the financial impact of it. There's another way of doing it, is to take the financial aspect out and sort of Monte Carlo it and produce it in a different sense. However, I do agree with Councillor Slade that the fact that some of these aren't moving and some of them are definitely, we can see that things are changing in internally and the external environment that impacts this. And I think the statement you've just made, Councillor Connolly, about the toleration or the level of tolerance we've got for risk and appetite, I think is very key. As a local authority, we should have a fairly conservative view on risk, and obviously it's not our money, so I think that is correct, and perhaps we have that set. But just another point, just reading the actual risk report we get against the individual risk, and I see, obviously the top thing, we have a risk owner. Just a suggestion to make, that the risk owner, I would like to see a little narrative from that risk owner, sort of one line, one sentence of their view of that risk, and a date by which they've said that. Because sometimes you get these and you wonder, I'm looking at one about CR2, we failed to achieve appropriate outcomes for quality of service for children and young people, including potential inadequate safeguarding. Well, yeah, that's sort of always going to be there, that risk, but we hear that children's services are improving and so on. So how's that affecting this risk? And I'd like to hear Ms. Hadley have a little bit of narrative on there, say that what's happened in the last quarter or so and so. Just a personal statement from that risk owner. I think it would really add some importance to this. The rest of it, great. It's what we hear in some of the other committees, and there's some fairly standard terms about, yes, there's a shortage of social workers. That may or may not change. From what I've heard, it doesn't change very much. But other conversations I've had, you get a bit more information when you actually hear from that, duty holder. And I think just to have a one line or one paragraph, them saying what's happened in the last quarter or the last year might be a better context of how that has affected the level of risk and their view. Because I'm assuming the duty holder works with you, Fiona, and sets that score, does the scoring with you. That's how it's done.
Yes,
And I
yes,
assume,
we do.
or their team would sit down with you and give you that. And your role is to put some moderation on that, I'm assuming, as well.
Yeah,
You know, because
to collate challenge and a review.
yeah, I mean, because you know, I'm sure Children's Services were going to rate that very highly because it's a more emotive subject, but you know, it might not be as important as the council going bust. I'm just putting that out there. It's not necessarily my views. Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion that there is some comment added for each of these as to what it would take to reduce the scoring, either likelihood or the impact, you know, what it would take to improve the trajectory, because things like the DSG and the cliff management, I think it would be good to know that, well, if there's nothing that's really going to shift the dial on those, yeah. So I mean, with cliff management, I'm really surprised that the 1.4 million doesn't at least improve something. You'd think it would improve, at least go in the right direction. Because surely it's not a functioning risk register if the scoring doesn't change at all, even if it's not gone away as a risk. So maybe can that be a challenge in the next update, that the areas kind of comment on what is needed to happen for it to actually improve as a risk. And then my second comment is there something we can do as a committee to send a message that, like, these need to be, you know, this kind of flatlining quarter on quarter. This is something that we do look at and are very worried about. And is there some way we can push that, Councillor Tully?
Yeah, I think a number of us sit on other committees, and we had at full council we had the chance to meet some of the heads of services, and I'm sorry to pick out Children's Services, but it's the only one I really got to speak any length of time to, and I'm not on the overview and scrutiny for Children's Services, but you know, it's quite important as councillors. We have a duty to not just do our overview and scrutiny sat in committees, but to do it all the time in our daily work. And I would suggest that, you know, it's one of the things that, you know, obviously we have a formal structure, but we do continue to ask the questions of heads of service through the right channels, of course. You know, what's happening about this, and risk is part of that discussion to be had.
Councillor Butler, I'm sorry, I think I missed you before. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I was going to mention risk. Was it CR 2023, which is the DFG deficit risk? I think it needs to be where it is, to be honest with you. And in fact, the discussion earlier on at the beginning of the meeting about when the reform plan was going to be submitted. So if you see on this risk thing, it was due in May, because obviously we're not going to get the money until that has been agreed. And at the moment, I didn't hear you very well earlier on, but it hasn't actually been submitted yet, has it? It has been submitted. Oh, okay. Sorry. So it hasn't been but it's not been finalised or agreed yet.
Just to clarify, so we've submitted our SEND reform plan to government by the deadline that was set to us.
Right. Okay.
It's now on government to assess that. Is it robust enough in terms of what they're requiring us to do? And then they'll make a decision. Yes, we're happy with it. We'll make a payment in October. If they're not happy with it, go back and look at it again, and there'll be a tranche 2 in spring next year.
Okay, but of course there is also the residual risk of the balance of the deficit that we have got to fund, and that's a huge amount of money. So this risk isn't going to go away for a long time, is it?
Yeah, and just to say that obviously we worked with a lot of consultants as well to get that report in, or get that application in, and the feedback we had was that was one of the best ones that they'd received. But it's a big but here. We've also got one of the biggest deficits, and therefore the likelihood of the government looking at it thinking, oh, that was a good report. Can we afford to do that?
I mean, the point is, you know, it's never paid until you've received the check, is it? You know, and the government being the way it operates, you know, you just don't know what's likely to happen. And as you said, you know, we might not get this money till April or even later. You know, who knows? Yeah.
I know that's certainly the feeling is we shouldn't count the chickens before they're hatched, but I do feel like we've got the impact is extreme, and it was extreme, and we're saying it's still, even if they give, you know, it's still extreme. So I guess it shows just how extreme it was, I suppose. So Mr. Filmer and then Mr. Sana.
And just to add, I suppose, just to back the reason why it's still as it is as a risk, is there is not a lot of detail from government about what they're taking on, and we don't know quite yet how that will be funded, etc. So there remains a lot of risk in this area. We don't even quite know what we can do in terms of the funding of the 10%. They haven't said what's actually, you know, permissible. So there's still a lot of risk in this area.
Sanad.
Yeah, thank you. It's an extension of what Matt said, really, but quite a lot of this is nuanced because, you know, in your example of the cliff slip, for example, it's all about timing when it changes on the risk register or when it comes off or completely, because whilst the council may have committed money on paper, until we start seeing some work on the cliffs and the cliffs are actually stable, we can't just take it off the risk register because we've committed some money. So I think it's the timing is crucial, and what event, i.e. works have commenced, we've started, we've done some work, and that cliff there isn't going to slip anymore. So that might be the event that means that risk reduces on the risk register.
No, that makes sense. And to be clear on both of them, I understand the examples, the reasons for keeping them, and I'm not challenging that. It's more of a reflection on, is there an active discussion by the risk leads as to when they can start to bring it down and what it would take, and if it would take, you know, in huge amounts of money that we're not planning, well, we should know that. And then some of them, I think they are going to be just tolerate, aren't they? That they're not going to go away anytime soon. But some of them, we should actively think about what it would take for them. One comment I had, which was I worried about the one on the deficit, on the MTFP risk CR09 failing to maintain a safe and balanced budget, and the risk on global events causing pressure. I worried about a bit of duplication there around the risk of global conflicts, and that being referred to in both risks. So I think there's the impact on finances. And it was just quite a challenge to make sure that they're not kind of speaking to the same things, that they are separate. I think they are speaking to separate issues, but just want to be aware of. And Fiona, I had a quick question. The directors, do the other directors get to see the director level risk registers? So is there a kind of peer review of the decision which director level risks make a corporate risk register?
Yes, Chair, yes, there is. So the entire risk register is part of the review cycle. Obviously, it goes through an update process for a month where risk leads and interested parties go in and amend them, and then it goes to CMB for their review as a collective. So they will challenge one another, and obviously that's how risks get taken off, put on during that process.
So another director could say, hang on, why are you not escalating that one? I'd be more worried about that one if I were you.
Indeed, yes, that discussion takes place.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on the corporate risk register? Good. Let's see how it looks at the next core meeting. There might be movement on the DSG by then. And I think the risk leads can take away, and the cabinet members can take away our comments about worrying about it being a culture of just accepting them, but and challenge to think about what is needed. Good. Thank you very much, Fiona. Very much appreciated. Right, so this is recommended the Audit and Governance Committee notes the update provided in this report relating to corporate risks. I think we have consensus to note that one. Good. Right, internal audit, quarterly audit plan update. Is that over to you, Ruth Hodges?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to be taking you through the quarterly audit plan update for the first quarter, and because of the timing of the last committee, it also takes in March of last year as well. I'll take the report as read, but I'll take you through some of the key points. My first point is an apology and then a correction. The first bullet point in the executive summary says that all audit assignments from 26-27 have been completed, and that should in fact say 25-26, as we're only just into the financial year. So yeah, our job is not quite yet done. So apologies for that, and I know the minutes will reflect that update, so thank you. Okay, so we've completed 29 audit assignments in the 4 months, the quarter plus March, 4 of which were partials. I draw the partials to your attention. The first one is in asset management in estates management, and that is the reconciliation between the asset register and the financial records is not complete. The second one is in relation to the corporate health and safety team, where there was noted there was no proactive inspection plan or inspections carried out. But I just would like to point your attention that that doesn't include routine health and safety reviews or statutory reviews. The third report, which was partial, was facilities management in respect of the leisure centres, where there was 3 high priority recommendations. The first in relation to electrical installation check, the second in relation to water inspections at 2 leisure centres, and the third being in relation to no formal oversight arrangements of those. The last partial audit report that we had was in relation to the Better Care Fund. This was an audit that was carried out jointly with partners in the NHS and Dorset, looking at all of the arrangements in the partnership. And there was 2 high recommendations that affected BCP Council. This was in relation to the signing of our Section 75 agreements and the potential that the Disabled Facilities Grant was potentially not being used for correct purposes. Just reflecting on the partial audit reports that we've made, and also jumping forward to our outstanding recommendations, you'll note that a lot of them are in connection with asset management, health and safety, and connected issues. And I think that speaks back to Fiona's issue about a new emerging risk that's going on the risk register, and also later to the annual governance statement, where there is a new governance issue relating to that. So I think those themes are coming through in our internal audit work as well. The report then goes on to show audits in progress and also plans to the amendments to the audit plan so far in the year. You may note that there seems to be more amendments than normal in a quarter, but many of those are to do with the fact that we're confirming some of the audits for the audit plan this year that hadn't been finalised and agreed by the time we brought the audit plan in March. Some are relating into changing risk or other assurance providers doing work, and a very small number in to do with the reduction of the days we have on the plan due to vacancy. I'd also just note that following the audit CQC report that we received recently, we're working with colleagues in adult social care to see if there's any change in the risk there, which we might need to bring forward audits or postpone other audits to make sure that we're looking at the right things for the organisation to give assurance on. And we've also brought to your attention those audits that we've provisionally planned to do during Q2. Just looking at the outstanding recommendations, we've got 8 high priority recommendations that we've detailed there. 3 of those are in connection with children's fire safety, and these have been brought to a number of previous committees, and 1 relation to asset management in estates, which ties into our partial report earlier. So again, we've got a theme there of asset management and health and safety related issues, which I think is the theme running through today. Then we've got three recommendations outstanding in relation to deficit recovery at schools, two a result of the school's finance audit and one directly in relation to the Linwood School audit. And then we've got one relating to deprivation of liberties audit, but I understand that that's virtually complete, that one there. And then we have three mediums outstanding. So in summary, we believe we're on course to deliver the internal audit plan and therefore be able to provide the assurance to Audit and Governance Committee and for the annual Chief Internal Auditors report for 26-27. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That was very clear. And I find it really useful to see how your work feeds into that discussion around the risk register and to the annual governance statement. It's really good to see. So, do you need any, Councillor Bartlett?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very, very quick question. On page 163, item 10, law and governance, information governance, in the classification or audit opinion, it says consultancy. I don't know what that means. It's not a category of audit opinion as far as I'm aware. So what does it mean?
Yeah, so I press the button. Where the work that we've undertaken doesn't allow us to draw an audit opinion, where we've advised the service on changes that can be made or implementation of things they're already doing, then we give that a consultancy badge. So I believe, I'm just looking at Simon because I think you might be more involved in this one this year. I believe that was because the service was already undertaking a review of itself and had identified a number of areas that it had already recognised it needed to make improvements in. So we would be essentially just reiterating what the service had identified and issues that he'd planned to address. But I'm just going to look at Simon to see if you can add any more to that.
I think that sums up nicely. Thank you, Ruth. You'll notice that maybe on one or two of the other ones. So it's exactly that situation where we come across a service where they know they need to make improvements. So it's no point us going in and telling them exactly what they know need to do. But we do pick it up and we do follow it up quite soon after to make sure they've improved.
All I'd say is that it is one of the classifications. Maybe it ought to be listed in the same way that the others are.
Yes, thank you.
So
I'll take that. I think that would be
means?
helpful. We'll add that to, I'll add that to our key for next time. Thank you.
Sanad.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Bartlett's query is a requirement of global internal audit standards that where we don't do work that provides an assurance, we must point out to those charged with government, i.e. you, that this was not an assurance piece of work. So that's why we've been very, very clear on that. And it's a different way of reporting because global internal audit standards has only recently brought that in.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, sorry, just taking it sort of back to basics. I had a look through, obviously, the high significance ones, and some I understand, some I don't understand. But the one on water tanks, I do understand about and I'm just using this as an example. I'm not particularly picking it out, but about the annual inspection, is that, and I'm going to ask a technical question, I apologise, is that a water hygiene issue? Are we talking about Legionella risk, or are we talking about other risk associated with that?
Mr. Milne.
No, we're not talking about Legionella. We're talking about physical inspection of the tank. Is it robust? Is it going to break at any time? You know, is it going to split the ceiling because actually it's leaking, or it's not water hygiene?
Thank you, because obviously some of these things are statutory, undertakings, and if there was a statutory breach, then that would be a much bigger issue. So thank you for clearing that up. Obviously, a statutory breach would be dealt with in a different manner than a high priority. But the redress and the actioning of this high priority. Could you just remind us? I'm sure you've told us before what the procedure is, where we've got let's say a number of sort of high priority ones, and I'll pick out BCP Leisure because they've got 3 at the moment. What's the process for sort of apart from this committee? You know, how do we make sure that these things are remedied? Thank you.
Okay, so as part of the close down of the audit, we'll have agreed a date with them. For high priority recommendations, it's normally 3 months as a rule of thumb. There may be occasions where we've agreed with them that it might be appropriate to do longer. For example, if it was affected by a piece of legislation or something that was forthcoming, but generally 3 months at the most. And then we follow those up with them when they are due. And then we have an escalation process if that doesn't get implemented at that time. So sometimes there may be a valid and sensible reason why that hasn't been able to be done, and then we'll escalate that up through Audit and Governance Committee. But ultimately, there's a management escalation process as well. So if this was at a particular level of management, then that would be escalated up through directors as well, and I'm thinking statutory officer group as well, if necessary. Yeah.
Ms. Tannard.
I was just going to say, could I add something? But I might have forgotten what I was going to say. You threw me when you looked at me.
Yeah, please do. Councillor Andrews had a question.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we just heard that your high priority to inspect the water tanks at those leisure centres is to do with them leaking or corroding or something like that. But still in section 5.3, you've classified as low priority the fact that Ashdown Leisure Centre hasn't got a Legionnaire's risk assessment in place. I would have thought that shouldn't be in low priority, it should be higher up, medium or high. I don't know why, but you know, I think that's and yes, there are contractors out there in the country who come on and do it. So I would like to see that done.
Is that something you want to follow up with? Is that specific to a particular audit? Okay, are you happy to share the results of that around with the committee? I have a question around the adjustments to next year's plan. I notice Awab's law has been removed because the service is carrying out a compliance review. And I'd be keen to understand how that compliance review that the service is doing, how that compares to a full audit that you're doing. So presumably you're comfortable that what they're doing will give you assurance in the absence of doing an audit. But just because of the importance of that, I'd be keen to make sure that that assurance is gained and that councillors get to see that as well. Fine, I want to put you on the spot on those ones. So if you can follow with those. And then my last question on this one is, as always, on the high priority recommendations where the target date was not met, and they're coming back. So I've seen a few of them have now gone since last time, which is great to see. So and a number of them they've slipped within this year. The original date was this year, and I think we give them tolerance of some slippage within a year. But the ones on children's health and safety and fire safety, and the one on asset management, they carry on from last year. So I'd be keen to know your thoughts on when might be an appropriate time for us to consider whether we might want to invite various directors to come and explain in some more detail. I mean, the health and safety and fire safety, you can sort of see that there's a lot of work going on that, but given the importance of it, that's something I wouldn't want us as a committee to be letting slip and not paying close attention to. So do you think that it might be appropriate at this point in time, or would you suggest waiting till the October revised date? Summer.
There's a couple of options available to you as the committee. The purpose of raising it with you is exactly that. What do you want? Some form of escalation? Now that could be, we could facilitate a say, a detailed appendix to attach to the next report to go into more detail on those and explain why they're having trouble completing them fully so they can be taken off and as completed. Or you could simply invite the responsible manager to come to your meeting and explain it verbally. So there's a couple of options available to you and how you'd like us to do that.
So I'd be interested in doing that for those two that have been pushed since last summer. I'd be interested in other committee members' opinions on that. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, under the estates thing, we've got under medium priority the fact that there's quite a few apparently rent reviews, presumably lease renewals and things like that, which aren't being done at a timely manner. I know some of the predecessor local authorities that made up BCP actually did farm it out to private enterprise, because I did some for Christchurch Borough Council. And, you know, obviously there is potential to generate some income, which, you know, Councillor Cox would like from getting these rent reviews done sooner rather than later. Obviously it's something to be looked at. And also re-gearing leases. You know, I've raised it historically about the fact that all local authorities 30, 40 odd years ago couldn't grant leases. This is ground leases longer than 99 years. The law got changed on that. There's quite a few ground leases, which even having sold off Airfield Estate, there's still some ground leases which the council have got where the leases are down to 40 or 50 years left. This is industrial and commercial property I'm talking about, not houses, whereby re-gearing the leases, paying us some money for that, and they will pay our legal and surveyors costs, and will generate some capital receipts. And I know there are some leases where there is an opportunity there, and I will mention one to Councillor Cox after the meeting, which I think would be timely to pursue. Thank you.
Is the asset management, estate management issue related to the new risk that you're proposing to the corporate risk register, or are they completely separate? You mentioned that there was a theme arising from a number of your audits, and that was feeding into the. Is that part of that, or is that completely separate issue?
They're separate issues, but they're under the umbrella of asset management. You know, there are clearly facets of asset management that we're struggling with across the piece.
Right. I think I would like to have some sort of update on the children's health and safety and fire safety. Perhaps a written update to be circulated with committee members, just explaining what the challenges with that are, what the barriers are, and what the actual risk to children is associated with that. I would feel more comfortable having some update on that. And I think that's slightly less escalation than dragging someone in front of us when there's presumably some good reasons why there's challenges, and they're working through them, and I'm sure that they're mindful of the children's safety. But so I think a written update would be a good appropriate first start, just to help us understand that. And the asset management, it does say the new CFO is considering options on how to unlock this piece of work. So maybe that might be one for you to give us an update on what that piece of work looks like, just so we understand a bit more. Not necessarily now. Happy for that to follow.
Through you, Chair. I am doing something similar for the overview and scrutiny board in August, which actually might answer some of the queries around that.
Thank you. Yeah, if we can just be shared that, then I think share that with us. I think that would help, just to understand what it is that we're that you're working through, and the challenges on that, and who's involved. I think would be useful to know sort of what areas are working on it. Right. Do we have any more questions on this? on the quarterly report, a quarterly audit plan update? No. Okay, so it is recommended that Audit and Governance Committee A notes progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 2025-26 and 26-27 internal audit plans. B notes the explanations provided for non-implemented recommendations in Appendix 1 and determines if further explanation and assurance from the Service Corporate Director is required. Do we have consensus on this one? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruth. So, item 10, annual review of declarations of interest, gifts and hospitality by officers, 2025-26. I think it's over to Simon Mill.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is the first of several annual reports that you'll be receiving tonight on key governance arrangements that are in place across the Council. So this first report presents an annual review of the Council's declaration of interests, gifts and hospitality, and it's for officers, not members, and provides assurance on the effectiveness of the arrangements in place during 2025-26. So just as a reminder, members approved a revised version of this policy back in February 2026, following our usual annual review. And the key changes to the policy were making sure that we strengthened arrangements and clarification around other employment for employees, clarifying line manager responsibilities for when they assess the declarations they receive, and also introducing an enhanced oversight for service directors. So service directors now sign off all declaration of interest forms, so there's better awareness around there. So awareness of the policies continue to be promoted throughout the year through corporate communications, manager briefings, and there's induction that makes sure that new employees are aware of this policy. There's mandatory training that refers to it, and also we arrange for some bespoke awareness sessions to certain council services. In terms of compliance with this policy, what we normally do is look at what we call tier 4 and above. So we're looking at head of service and above senior officers. There's a reason for that. The policy requires all of those to submit a return, even if it's a nil return, so there's no interest or gift to declare. So following a small number of reminders, as is normally the case to certain officers, we did get all 113 declarations received. There was some reminders, but they were mainly for people that were new to the organisation or have been newly appointed into a senior role. However, for complete transparency, we are still chasing down one form that we are waiting to be signed off by a service director who's about to be appointed next week. So, but that will be, I'm sure that will come into place very soon. So the important message for this report is that there were no reported incidents or whistleblowing disclosures or other concerns relating to undeclared interests, gifts or hospitality that resulted in disciplinary action during the 2025-6 year. So looking ahead to this year that we're in, internal audit are currently carrying out a review of below tier 4. So this is everyone else, non-senior officers, to make sure that arrangements are adequate. And also we'll be looking at other things like the National Fraud Initiative. Every other year looks at data matching of through payroll records to Companies House to make sure that we've made sure officers have declared those potential interests in the companies. And the outcomes of those reviews we'll report to you next year. So overall, I believe that the head of an audit and management assurance can give assurance that the policy remains fit for purpose and there's good levels of awareness and compliance across the workforce. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions on this one? No. We had an interesting discussion at our last meeting on Future Places around declarations of interest. I'm wondering if there's, I'd be keen to know how much flex BCP has to make stipulations around what needs to be declared and how much is just Councillor Slade could go further.
Yeah, so just I was going to ask, and I was umming and ahhing because we've made a set of recommendations have been made through the Future Places investigation, and I'm assuming they're going to have to go through a process. But one of those recommendations was that anyone of a level of employment in one of our companies that was of a level of tier 4 or above, so that would be subject to this if they were officer, should also be subject to it if they were an arm's length or a council company. Do you see any problems with us making that recommendation and requirement for those people who might be employees. So Future Places obviously was, you know, a company where they were working for Future Places, but there became a massive conflict because people were potentially didn't have to do this and they could make up their own system. We wanted to make sure it was of at least the same standard. So I'd be interested in your views in case we have to modify our recommendations further.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, interesting and massively would encourage that approach. The only thing I can foresee is probably a need to consult with HR regarding, you know, we're talking here employees, code of conduct, contracts or employment that refer to this policy. Do these other officers, are they bound by them? We just would need to clarify that they're definitely fully bound by them. I'm pretty sure they are, but I think we need to make sure they are. And we would also need to make sure we're really clear in our annual evolution of this policy as well to refer to that. So it sounds like a positive move, but just I think HR check would be sensible.
Thank you, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I think that the terms about other employment came in because of the case recently, didn't it? If I seem to recall, where a council employee was found to be working for about 5 different councils. And we wish to see that, certainly not in our senior officers, but also cascading down. So, although certainly, as Councillor Slade just mentioned, we would like to roll this policy, I think we could literally put into our council-owned companies. I think it will work without any adaptation. So, I think that's yet to be finalised, but that is correct. My understanding that the two things about other employment is down to the recent case law.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's definitely the case. So, it may recall, but the last annual report, we did state that there were 3 cases of undeclared employment, so we strengthened it, and that will be tested when we carry out the NFI matching later this year, because that does pick up potential other employment as well. NFI, National Fraud Initiative. Yeah, so data matching across organisations and various data sets.
Yeah, what the NFI does, it matches payroll records across the public sector. So if there are common national insurance numbers working for several, those respective organisations will get those matches and say, you probably want to investigate this because someone with the same NI numbers working for you works for them over there.
Councillor Slade.
Can I just ask why it's only the public sector? Because presumably the biggest risk, for example, would be a planning officer also working for a planning consultant.
I guess the simple fact is the government can't compel private companies to participate in the NFI. So it's a public sector initiative.
And can I ask, do officers have to declare, or are they invited to declare professional relationships? And to what extent is that up to their discretion as to what that would mean?
Yeah, the guide, the policy, there's no one rule fits everybody. So what the policy says is that depending on what your job is, you should consider what the public may perceive as a conflict. So I might, given my role as the Chief Internal Auditor, I will be ultra cautious and I will declare things probably more than somebody that over there that does something different to me and might not need to declare things that I declare. So for example, I declare that my children attend BCP schools and we audit BCP schools. Clearly I can't oversee an audit where my children go to school. So the mitigation on my record is that Simon and Ruth manage those audits completely separate to me. I don't see them. They go out without my name on them. So that's an example of a mitigation that's very bespoke to me. And somebody else might not need to declare that their children go to school in a BCP school.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, but conversely, if you worked on for the seafront services selling ice cream, it wouldn't stop you from going and working in your dad's ice cream van at the forest on a Sunday, would it?
Good. Do we have any more questions on this item? Right. Thank you very much. It is recommended that Audit and Governance Committee notes the annual review of declarations, interest, gifts and hospitality by officers 2025-26. 2. Notes the opinion of the Head of Audit and Management Assurance that the policy is fit for purpose and that there was a good level of awareness and compliance in 2025-26. Do we have consensus on that? Thank you very much. Right, item 11, use of regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and Investigatory Powers Act Annual Report 2025-26. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. And to avoid repeating those long words again, I'm going to refer to RIPA and IPA. That's okay. So in accordance with best practice, this report provides the committee with an annual update on the Council's use of powers under RIPA and IPA. And just as a brief reminder, RIPA and IPA are laws that regulate surveillance and communications data and investigatory powers used by public authorities and also law enforcement. And just as a further subnote, you might wonder why there's a RIPA and an IPA. The IPA is the further definitions regarding communications data. It takes into account that communications data is modernised over the years, so it needed to produce some further detailed guidance on communications data surveillance. So as a general guide, RIPA and IPA powers should only be used as a last resort where less intrusive methods have been considered and are not considered sufficient. And any use must be lawful, necessary and proportionate to the seriousness of the matter being investigated. So really setting the scene in terms of making sure we're very careful on this. So in summary, members are asked to note that the Council did not make use of any RIPA or IPA powers during 2025-26. And just to confirm, no covert surveillance authorisations were approved and there was no request to access any communications data. And just to reassure members, although these powers were not used during the year, the Council continues to maintain appropriate arrangements, including trained authorised officers, a senior responsible officer in charge of it, a central oversight by the Head of Audit and Management Assurance as the RIPA administrator, to make sure the Council remains able to exercise these powers lawfully and necessary, and should exceptional circumstances arise. As part of the annual review of the policy back in February 2026, just made a very minor amendment regarding links to policies and strategies that the Council has. And again, the review confirmed that the Council's governance, oversight and reporting arrangements remained appropriate and fit for purpose. We are required to submit an annual return to the Investigatory Powers Commission Officer, and we did that within the required timescale. And they do carry out a 3-yearly inspection on our arrangements, and that's next year in 2027 next year. So we'll be preparing for that in line with the monitoring officer. So in summary, this annual review provides assurance that appropriate governance arrangements are in place and there's no use of RIPA and IPA powers during 2025-26. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That is clear and good to know. Any questions on this one? Okay, it is recommended that Audit and Governance Committee notes the contents of the report, including that the Council did not make use of powers under the RIPA 2000 or IPA 2016 during the 2025-26 financial year, and that appropriate governance arrangements remain in place. Do we have consensus on this one?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Right. Item 12, Annual Breaches of Financial Regulations and Procurement Decision Records Report 2025-26. This is you, Mr. Stannard.
Sorry. Yeah, just covering some basic points first of all. So breaches of financial regulations are of course bad news. We don't want to see them and we can't hide from that fact. somewhat stating the obvious, following financial regulations gives the council the best chance of achieving compliant, efficient, effective procurement at best price or best value. PDRs, procurement decision records, I'll use the acronym PDRs from now on, do what they say on the tin. They explain the commissioning officer's procurement decisions through the process. And in BCP Council, they include why certain allowable flexibilities might have been used. And this report concentrates on those allowable flexibilities because they are where the council has not followed what might be called normal or expected procurement routes for some good reason. Committee should be assured that the report is full and frank and with no hidden elements. So first of all, turning to breaches, there were 19 in total in 25-26, but please be clear that this is when they were identified. So the quantum, the financial quantum of these breaches may cover several financial years, not just one financial year, and that's prevalent on quite a few of the breaches in this listing. And indeed, the big breach that we'll get to, BR1, BR1, which I think is BR14 on our list, that was from 23-24, and we identified that in our audit in 25-26. So they're set out in detail at paragraph 4, and they are ordered high to low. The common reoccurring theme is that officers were unaware of the need to complete PDRs at certain required stages through the process. And the report does go on to highlight initiatives and actions to address that issue, which includes training, awareness, and communications. And an example of one of those communications, just for your reference, is shown at Appendix 1. What I now want to try and do is just answer the so what. So what does this mean to BCP Council that these breaches exist? And I want to use BR1, the large one, as an example, because it's a theme that is common through many of the breaches, probably 15 of the 19 breaches. What are the implications and the impact of the breaches where a PDR was not completed? So unless it's stated in the narrative in those sections, the procurement process adopted was fair, open, competitive and transparent, and thus the contract sum paid represents best value. So you might ask, what's the problem? Well, the PDR process is a council agreed gateway that you've agreed as a committee. It's in financial regulations, and it provides the opportunity for our expert teams, procurement, legal, finance, to confirm the compliance and appropriateness of the procurement process proposed before we embark on it. So in these instances of these breaches, had there been issues, and we are fortunate that there were not issues, we would have missed the opportunity to correct those before we embarked on the procurement. So that is the breach, not there's a problem with the spend, we've spent money inappropriately. That's, we haven't followed the process that we set out to maximise the benefits of achieving a good procurement. So that's the issue there. And that's common across 15 of the 19 breaches. So turning to PDRs, paragraph 11, there were 382 in total recorded in 25-26, and that's an increase from 212 in 24-25. Whilst there's no single factor for this increase, the most significant factor is simply that in 25-26 there was a higher profile of contracts ending, usually after their 3 to 5 year term, and thus a new procurement process was required. So Appendix 2 shows all 133 PDRs where procurement flexibilities were used for some good reason. And as usual, if a councillor has any questions on any of those specifics, I'll go away, facilitate a response, and then furnish the councillor and the rest of the committee with that response, because obviously I just can't, I haven't got the retention of 133 records there to be able to answer questions tonight. So by far the largest procurement flexibility recorded was competition was absent for some technical reason. And I just wanted to explain what that means. You could probably have a good guess. But there are a number of reasons, but a couple of the more common reasons are compatibility. So you an obvious one, you've got a piece of equipment and you need a spare part. You know, it's a technical specification and it only fits that bit of equipment, and the market who sells that equipment might be restricted. So we might have a restricted market and we can only go to, I don't know, 2 suppliers, 1 supplier even, can't go out to the normal procurement methods. And then another example might be in a works contract, a bit of an extreme example, but a contractor's on site doing work for us. Suddenly they do some excavation, there's a sinkhole, the new work, sinkhole needs to be filled. It would be perverse of us to get another contractor on site to come and fill, you know, it's an extra part, and it makes sense to award the work to the contractor on site. So that's a technical reason that we're allowed to use within the flexibilities of the Procurement Act. So I hope that covers a few of the elements in the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, in the executive summary, it starts by saying the relatively low number of breaches suggests a good level of understanding of the requirements among managers and officers across most service directorates, resulting in general compliance. Well, I'm not sure I can agree with that, given the figures that you've put, because of the 382 PDRs, 133 were subject to waivers of some sort under those 4 categories, which is 35% of the total. And 19 breaches of the total of 382 is 5%. That's 5% of all PDRs were breaches. But staggeringly, the sum is 48 odd million pounds. And, you know, if you don't understand the system or what PDRs are really about, those figures hit you hard, you know, you say, my goodness, what's going on here? So, and like you explained what the purpose of the PDR was, but the opportunity to pick up on something is lost, isn't it, if there's nothing there. But my question was, how is the money spent authorised in the absence of a PDR? How can somebody actually sign off a £30 million expenditure in the absence of a PDR? How is that even possible? I mean, a figure of that much it's got to be signed off by the monitoring officer, the chief exec, and probably even Mike Cox in some cases. How is it possible for those level of expenditures to be made without a PDR? It seems to me absolutely fundamental to the process. So, you know, whilst there may be a general, a good level of understanding, I'm not sure that actually is reflected in the statistics. Can I just go on to the actual waivers themselves? Because if you look at the, what is this? There's a table here.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Bartlett. They're not waivers. These are good reasons why we're allowed to exercise procurement flexibility. So a procurement decision mark record within those 133 is not bad news. That's good news that we've recognised that it's unusual and we've documented why we've done it. So it's a positive governance step, not a negative governance step.
Yeah, there used to be waivers under the previous. That's now been updated. So instead of having waivers, they've just got PDRs. But having a PDR that specifies one of those four, that's not a problem. That's not bad news. That's just a good reflection that they're filling them in properly, right? If that's what you mean. But the breaches, that's another matter. Your microphone, Councillor Bartlett.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yeah, it's on page 204, the table, PDR circumstances of the category 2, a particular supplier is required because competition is absent for technical reasons, which you've just explained what it is. But it's increased by 400, was it? Yeah, 400% basically in a year.
Sorry, just to check my understanding, why is that a bad thing? Because my
Well,
understanding is that that's just a
it's
reflection of.
Well, it might not be. I'm just trying to understand why there's such a huge increase. It seems, in 23-24 there was 21, 24-25 there was 23, 25-26 103. So that category is being used a lot more than usual, and there must be a reason for it. If I was cynical, I'd say it's easier to sign off something if you can find a reason why you don't have to go through the rest of the process. I don't know, but there must be a reason for it. I just wondered if there was an explanation. It's probably an unreasonable question to ask you directly.
To be fair, I wasn't challenging I think it's a very good question, because I do suspect there might be some of that going on. But I just want to be clear that we're treating the discussion of the reasons for the PDRs being what they are is different from the breaches discussion, right? I think for me that's my only comment is, yeah.
No, Councillor Bartlett, your question's perfectly reasonable, and I tried to answer it in the overall numbers. So PDRs have increased from 212 to 382 this year. So whilst the increase in the second category of circumstances is not proportionate, it's bigger than proportionate, I accept that. A good chunk of it is explainable by the increase in the overall. What I think we could do is later on in the year, we've got Stu Bickle doing his half-yearly updates to you as a committee on procurement matters, and obviously they are the team that approve PDRs. So if you want to talk to him about why the increase in that particular category and you're concerned that it's the easy option, I don't know the answer, frankly. So I think Stuart's team have reviewed PDRs in using their professional capacity, understanding the Procurement Act 23 regulations, and in their view, those PDRs are okay and compliant. So, but I get what you're saying and why you might want assurance from Stuart.
Can I just add to that? Can we ask Stuart Bickle, when he comes to do this deep dive, could we ask him to specifically talk about whether those reasons, such as competition being absent, is this such a problem that the council isn't getting a proper competitive market for these? If this is such a case that they're only able to go out to single suppliers for some of these, that at some point that becomes a systemic problem. That it would be good to expand on that.
I would add, remember that every officer has a best value duty. So even when you want to buy the cheapest possible thing, and you're still obliged to get some sort of quote and it doesn't have to be a physical quote from a company. You can do your research. If you're buying I'm going to use a silly example. It doesn't happen in reality, but if we're buying a pad of paper, of course we don't in reality because we've got a call-off contract. But in using that principle, the council officer must, if you're going to pay £5 for a pad of paper, you've got to have some evidence that £5 is best value, and you probably go and do that by doing a bit of research on Amazon and saying, well, yeah, £5's about the going rate for a pad. So, and that's how you, and proportionate. Obviously, we don't do those for more significant value purchases. You know, the requirements are more. So 0 to 5,000. You know, an officer has to stand up and be counted. And if somebody challenges best value, how do you prove you've obtained best value? 5 to 25, more regime. You got to get minimum of 5 quotes, preferably 2 from a local supplier, and then over 30,000, you have to go out to full tender. So that's the broad makeup of the process.
Sorry, yeah, I accept that. I mean, I guess the first point that I made about, you know, how stuff is signed off, you know, huge sums of money by senior people in the absence of a PDR. I find it incredible that this is happening at all. You know, one would see a thing come through on your desk with a PDR attached to it. Oh yeah, it's been through the process. They've senior purchasing people are happy with this. They've done all the checks and balances. I can now sign the contract. You know, and I just find it incredible that that process has not been followed on those sort of at that level of expenditure.
I think Councillor Tarling and then Councillor Slade.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I must admit, when I saw the headline figures and the little table there, it shows the value of the breaches. Obviously, it initially looks like there's a trend, but then obviously there's statistical sort of numbers skewing really takes it out. So if you took the £30 million out off the 48, you'd be down to 18, which would be quite an improvement. And when you look at the details of what happened for that £30 million, obviously there was a PDR done at the outset, which has committed £500,000 already, which would have been the start of an approved tender process. I'm assuming for that we would follow a public sector tendering process or an approved so you know we the risk item isn't that high when you're following an approved tender process, be it you know a public contract. So you know if you took that out, it would show a completely different picture. And I think you know initially I was feeling quite, oh God, what's going wrong? It's getting worse here. But if you take that first one out and take out the outliers, you know, if you were to plot that on a graph, it would make a lot more sense. The bit I do find interesting was the second paragraph after that. The breaches are primarily due to a lack of awareness of financial regulations. You know, and I've mentioned the Procurement Act. I think when Stuart was here last time about you know, it was new to me. I think when it was first mentioned, when I was first on this committee, or reasonably new to me. But those that have authority to expend money in the council should be very aware of the Procurement Act. So I'd like to know, and this, I think you've already answered it, saying that we've got another meeting with Stuart, that this training is being rolled out. How many people have had this training of the decision makers? And this is probably another point of audit, really, is just to see, you know, we've got I don't know, 200 people with authority to spend. Of those, you know, it should be a mandatory compliance that they followed this and they are aware of what that is, and that the training is adequate. So I think that will be a focus of a future audit, if it's not already in your audit plan, to say, well, lack of awareness, you know, fool me once and you know fool you, but fool me twice and it's on me then, isn't it? So that's something I want to see really picked up by next time we discuss this. But in fact, maybe it's something for Stuart to answer when he's next in front of this committee. Thank you very much.
Councillor Slade.
Thanks. Yeah. So looking at the breaches, I think it is skewed by those 2 huge ones, which you know looks quite terrifying. But I am also concerned that the reason given for each of those breaches is, oh, we didn't know a PDR was needed. Now, in that first one, I get it. It had gone through a council process, and they assumed that trumped and I understand how that could happen, but with some of the others, it's almost like we all have to do mandatory training. Surely this is part of someone's job. And when you looked at one of them, which one was it? It was one of the seafront ones where the issue had happened for 5 years. And so it was, oh, well, we didn't realise. And we had, we hadn't had this in year after year after year. So I don't understand why the breach has been allowed to continue over a 5-year period. For walkie-talkies, you're right, it was that. But my other question is relating to the detailed, the PDR one, and whether someone is auditing whether the right category is genuinely being used. Because I look down the list and it's a very detailed list and it's very small writing. I haven't got my glasses on, but there's a £500,000 spent on short breaks, daytime activities for disabled children. A particular supplier is required because competition is absent for technical reasons. I find that hard to believe. There are a number of providers out there, and therefore, if you're spending £500,000, that looks like, to the untrained eye, we've got our pet organisation we want to deal with. And so I would be questioning, that doesn't feel like a technical reason. It might feel like these are our preferred contractors and we've already got a contract. So my question is around whether we should have more categories so that people, because it feels like everyone's just chucking it in that one. Because if you go down to, of course, if it's foam pit repair, or bits to the twin sails, of course it's tricky. But pest control seafront, there's lots of pest control companies out there. So why would you not follow a process? So that's where my question lies: is what reassurance can we have that category is being appropriately used, and why aren't we looking at multiple categories so that we can actually ask officers to be a bit more specific and see if there are trends? And my final comment is, does someone in audit look to see if there are individual officers who are breaching more than others? And if so, I'm not looking for named names clearly, but how are we treating individual officers who may be not being quite so attentive to the detail?
Please.
Addressing your material point first, it is Stuart Bickle's team's role to make sure that the reason being used on a procurement decision record, i.e. whether it's A, B, C or D, and by the way, those are the categories in the Procurement Act, so those are what we're allowed to use, albeit the second definition has been changed this year to be a more all-encompassing type wording. So it's not technical reasons anymore. It's a bit more complicated than that. I can furnish you outside, or furnish the committee with what that is for this year. But it is Stuart's team, so they are your auditors in that respect, because they're the professionals. They have to make judgment. Is the commissioning officer gilding the lily here and saying that service only exists with that entity? And my experience is they do push back heavily. So I'd be quite surprised, going down that list, we can all pick out ones where a bit odd, but obviously we don't know the nuances. So that's why I had the offer that if anyone who wants to really specific one, we could go back to procurement. We can even give you the PDR, and you can have a good read of the PDR, and hopefully that will assure you that the process is robust.
Could you send us around 5 or a handful of them for us just to see the
Well,
sort of
I'll
what they
include
look like?
that 500,000 one. I guess some of them, like the NHS services, like East Dorset Drug and Alcohol Service, you can understand that there's only one supplier of a drug and alcohol service in the conurbation, so they're a bit. So I'll have a look at some others and see.
On that point, or no, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. The common comment or theme in those 19 waivers we've got presented there is lack of officer awareness. Why weren't they aware? You know, whose fault is it? Is it middle management not briefing new members of staff? You know, has there been, for those 19 examples, improved training? Have you got proof that that training has been done? On a couple of examples, I'm quite surprised. We've got item 12 and item 13. Item 12 is about asbestos surveys being done even without a contract. Item 13, valuations for properties, even without a contract. You know, if the surveyor missed the asbestos and we had to then spend £10,000 getting rid of the asbestos, we couldn't even sue because there's no contract. Same with the valuations. If we pay too much for a property without a proper contract in place, negligence, do we have the ability to sue? So, you know, there's those quite important aspects there that staff need to be aware about. Get a contract in place. I know in this day and age of internet and DocuSave and everything like that, getting a signature on a piece of paper is difficult. But you know, how do we actually ask a question? How do we go about getting a proper contract in place? Do we still rely upon a signature and a scan taking place? And the other comment I've got to make, I was listening to Councillor Bartlett asking about senior officers, you know, the MO and the chief executive, you know, were they told about all these millions of pounds of breaches? Because I know that there's some date back a number of years, but it's a large figure that we're hearing about this year.
On the issue of contracts, could I refer Councillor Andrews back to the answer we gave to Mr McKinstry in his question? There's always a default contract, and based on those terms that we explained to, or the chair explained to Mr McKinstry, but there's that, you know, the what was the term at the back end? I'm not hugely familiar with it, but the entire understanding contract, that is a legal term apparently. So that is the contract that is missing, but we've got a form of contract that enables us to do the basics. And in terms of senior management involvement, there is a new for this year a procurement board, corporate procurement board, which the CFO chairs. So Matt is currently chairing that, and a standing item of that board is to review all breaches. We do that each and, you know, so every meeting, if there's a breach that's occurred since the last meeting, we look at that in not reasonable detail. We see what the theme is, and then the board makes a decision on, okay, are we satisfied that the mitigations suggested by the lead in that area, i.e. training, awareness, is that robust? And if we don't think it's robust, that board will push back and say, we need you to do more than what you're doing.
Councillor Beasley. Sorry, did you want to come in first, Councillor Cox, on that point, or Councillor Beasley?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments around the breaches, if I may, because it occurs to me that over quite some years, when this paper comes to us in the annual cycle, poor Mr Stannard is put in a position which is almost untenable because he is the focus of all of our questions and must sometimes feel that he is being held to account specifically for the weakness of others in terms of actually committing the breaches in the first place. So I wanted to just reflect on paragraphs Well, starting with paragraph 6 on page 202, because it does seem to me that what has been put in place around corrective actions have been primarily focused on targeted or bespoke training, etc., etc. It seems to me that the right thing's been done to set this up to try to minimise the breaches for the future, yet they continue to occur or indeed increase, as we've had evidenced. We then go a bit further down, and we at paragraph 8 talk about the procurement and contract management team issuing communications to all colleagues, etc., etc. And then down to paragraph 10, where it's the current assessment is that none others have been identified currently, which is good news. So what I'm wondering is, there does seem to be either not a prioritisation of this issue with those who are responsible, or the training simply isn't working one way or another, or the written instructions aren't working. And I'm just wondering a couple of things, I suppose. One is whether this could be made more directly and more onerously on those who are responsible, whether it's something that once he's got his feet under the table, the new Director of Law and Governance might want to offer support in the process to make sure that our performance improves, or whether it needs to be escalated further, because we don't really, I don't think we can go on like this year after year with the same report, when it seems to me that the root cause of it is that basically the rules are not being adhered to by some officers. It is pretty simple, actually. And I have to say that if this was in the private sector, it wouldn't be sort of optional whether you complied or not. You would comply, or there would be consequences. There haven't been any consequences, it seems to me. So what we need to do is to make sure that the instructions, rather than the guidance, the instructions being given by Mr. Stannard and his team are accepted as such, and that compliance is mandatory. And if not complied with, there will be consequences. And if it's escalated to an even more senior officer to be responsible, I think that's got to be a step in the right direction, Chair.
Thank you. Although my experience of regulating the private sector suggests that it's not necessarily a better picture in the private sector. Mr. Stannard.
I've already done a bit of scheming in the background with Matt around this issue. And I'm going to formally recommend, because like Councillor Beasley says, I don't particularly like reporting this position. So I am going to ask the Chief Executive to consider whether he and the leader issue a communications that is very high gravitas, top level. Nobody has delegated authority, and it fits with red expenditure controls. Nobody has delegated authority to proceed with a procurement over £5,000 without a procurement decision record. Engage the procurement team if you need any help, something like that. So I think that was my plan outside of the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Would you mind if I ask a question? A couple of meetings ago, we had a fabulous presentation from the IT team. It was mainly around AI. But when we transitioned over to the new finance team, or finance system, presumably when you go and, buy something or contract for something, there's a series of buttons you press on the system. Has anyone not spoken to the IT team that prevents you being able to physically spend £25,000 without a big red button that flashes up saying, please attach your PDR here? I mean, that can't be beyond the wit of man. And this is not a criticism of you, but this is surely the IT system and the finance system would actually go, this you can't spend money without doing something else, or please confirm you have attached tick. The fruit machine, I'm sure there's not a pinball machine actually. I don't think there was that many providers of but that's a real world simple answer, isn't it?
That was my first question to Sanad, is that in most companies there's an IT system, and if we click send, a big box comes up saying cannot happen, it cannot be done. But the issue, to my understanding, the issue is that this isn't about the transfer of payment going through. This is at the point of calling somebody up and saying, can I have some, can you do this service for me? Is that correct? The issue is that it's much more nebulous about when that point in time happens and how it happens and who it happens with. Is that right, Mr. Fenn?
VJ, I'm not sure I've got the answer, but taking on what Councillor Slade and Councillor Bartlett said, I think I need to consider how we could build in a control around that PDR before we get to the point of setting up budgets, committing spend, etc. So I need to understand the system capabilities, but I do take the point. I think there's something there we need to explore.
So this is my first comment, is that this shouldn't happen through a technological solution, right? Everyone makes errors. Everyone in an organization this size will make errors. This is why you build in an IT system that doesn't let you progress unless you've completed certain steps. So if you could look into that and update us. So this is part of a broader question I have, is I would like to make a request that for the next meeting, when we have this deep dive on procurement, that at that point in time, between officers have had a discussion about what the different options are available for putting in place some measures to deal with this, because I'm quite tolerant of, I'm understanding of these. I mean, I think the amounts of money involved is neither here nor there, really. It's about the reason for the breach is more concerning. Okay, the first one, it went to full council, there was a misunderstanding, fine, park that one. The others were all picked up because of an audit you did, which is a great example of your auditing work. It picked up that something they'd been doing year on year. I mean, somebody whose job it is to call up B&Bs, they've been doing that for years. That's the whole point of their team. It takes that external intervention and audit to say, hang on, did you know that actually you should be? So I understand that, but if you just look at through the reasons, there's just such a wide lack of awareness. And my worry is that relying on training for such a large workforce is quite a risky strategy. So I would suggest that officers take away some further controls, perhaps identifying individuals within areas, and only they are allowed to procure, or some system such as that. Maybe not one central team for the whole, but maybe at least some sort of hub and spokes within the areas. So there's just more controls, because relying on training for that number is challenging. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it reminded me very much of Mr. Redmond's statement that he made and the questions that he put in full council this week, where he talked about, you know, the number of different areas that are actively doing their own procurement processes and what the shortcomings of that was, and how our central procurement team don't always get involved in all these other areas. And I think he's made some very good points in the statement, but of course we're not allowed to discuss that. But you know, it very much is central to some of the things that Mr. Redmond was saying, this issue.
So I think that there is it is a challenge with BCP that it is quite siloed per directorate, and there are benefits to that and not having a very top-down central control system. But there are obviously downsides, and I think that there needs to be some more controls put in place. And I'm not going to say what I think they should be, but I'd like to ask officers come back to us with some quite strong recommendation. I would encourage some quite strong changes to the way it does things, because it's asking too much for some quite low level employees who have to get things for their day-to-day work to be up to date with everything, and there's churn and there's new people joining the team, and it's asking a lot. So if there was just a systemic kind of control in place, and then potentially a technological one as well, if that could be possible, then I think that should be explored. And if you could come back to us with their ideas on that, that would be welcome. Councillor Dedden.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very conscious that I'm only standing in for Councillor Phipps, and I don't feel qualified really to make an input. So I do just want to mention that I have read all the papers, and there's a spelling mistake on page 199. So I just want to make sure. It's unusual for me to be sitting silent, but there you go. I have read it all.
Thank you very much for confirming that. And I'm terribly sorry, Councillor Cox. I thought you were just nodding in agreement with what I was saying. I didn't realise that you wanted to come in. Thank you.
No, I was indicating before that, but no, I was nodding in agreement with what you were saying, and I think there's been a lot of good and interesting comments made. I just wanted to say my 2 pennies worth. Really, was that my reaction was very similar to Councillor Darling's when I first read it, and going, "Oh God, this is going in the wrong direction," and that's the initial. When you first look at that, that's the initial reaction you have. And one thing I just want, in addition to all the really good suggestions that have been made so far, one suggestion I would like to make is that table at the front is changed to make sure that to identify when those breaches occurred, because you've just identified, as you've said before, those were when you identified when they were found. It would be more interesting to find out when they occurred. So if they occurred 2 or 3 years ago, so these are historical ones. So I think it'd be useful to track when they occurred. And if they're still going up, then I have really got a problem. But
and it would make sense to identify some in a group. If you do an audit on an area and you identify, it would make sense to get, but it's historic. It's not this year's breaches. Sorry, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, just one last point. These absence of PDRs, whatever, have been picked up by the audit. There may have been a lot more. We don't know because, you know, I think the ones that have been identified have been picked up by audit. Not all the areas have been audited. So there might be loads more. We don't actually know, do we? Yeah. Is that in the report? Is it?
So one thing, so I would like to support your proposal that you discussed with the Chief Executive, but I'm not sure that needs to come to us if that's something that you're just discussing with the Chief Executive on a strong message around that. I would like us to encourage you to come back to the next meeting with your ideas for some quite bold proposals to put in some controls and rely less on widespread training. And then third, I would like us to send out a message on the behalf of the committee to service directors, didn't others' thoughts, basically expressing how seriously we take the financial regulations. They're there for a reason, and we have a low tolerance for breaches, and we want to make sure that they really, really push this training for new starters, training for their team, think about identifying who should be doing procurement within the team. And I just send that message out that it is something we as a committee take very seriously, and directors should prioritise. Interested in other committee members' thoughts on such a communication to directors. Do officers think that would be appropriate, would be helpful? Would that be from me to send on behalf of committee members? Is that an email? Okay, all right. So I think that's 2 actions and then 1 action that Officer Nigel's pursuing separately. Good. And then the other action is that when Stuart Bickle speaks to us, he'll also talk a little bit more about how he interrogates PDRs and whether this technical reason is robust. Anything else on this item? Right. Thank you very much. So it is recommended that the Audit and Governance Committee notes the breaches of financial regulations and relevant procurement decision records that occurred during 2025-2026. Consensus on that? Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. Chief Internal Auditor's Annual Opinion Report 2025-26. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. So global internal audit standards require me to formally report annually to you on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment and offer an overall opinion. That said, this report is essentially a consolidation, a summary and a recap of everything you previously received from internal audit through the committee cycle last year. And that was mainly in the quarterly reports that Ruth has delivered tonight. So My opinion for 25-26 is shown in the executive summary on page 211 and in paragraph 4 on page 215. And simplified, it is my opinion that BCP Council has in place an adequate and effective framework of governance, risk management and internal control. That overall opinion does not mean, of course, everything's perfect, and there were areas of governance weakness, that control weaknesses and non-compliance with policies. Internal Audit have made recommendations accordingly to correct and improve these areas. And further, service managers have agreed to, in 100% of circumstances, to implement internal audit recommendations. These have been drawn out in the various reports to you through the year. And as Ruth explained earlier, we have a rigorous follow-up procedure to confirm the implementation of recommendations, and that is overseen and reported to you as a committee. For good practice, partial audit opinion reports are again highlighted in my report at the table on page 217. But to be clear, these have already been received and reviewed by you in detail through the year. I would just like to take this opportunity of the annual report to formally and in public thank my colleagues in the internal audit team for their dedication and professional diligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure as a committee we would echo that to the team. And we do see how hard you as a team work and the difference you make to the council. Okay, do we have any questions on this?
Just a comment to add to what you said. Mr. Stannard and his team have done a tremendous lot of work, extra work in the past 12 months, obviously due to the Future Places inquiry. And I congratulate them and thank them for the work the whole team has done to support Mr. Stannard, who has obviously led the Future Places inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
It's probably a sign of how well engaged we feel throughout the year that we don't have any questions. I think take that as a sign that there's nothing surprising to us in here. So I think with that, shall we move on? Do we have consensus to note that? Thank you. Do I need to read it out? It notes the annual report and opinion on the overall adequacy of the internal control environment, governance processes, risk management and internal control arrangements for BCP Council. Do we have consensus? Good. Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report 2025-26. This is to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Guidance from CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, recommends that audit committees in councils should prepare an annual report to provide full council with assurance that they fulfil their purpose and they demonstrate a positive impact. CIPFA further considers that an annual report to be a key committee output. This is the third year such a report has been produced by the BCP A&G Committee. The BCP A&G Committee annual report follows the format of the CIPFA guidance and includes headings used within the CIPFA position statement, such as structure and composition of the committee, independent statement, a statement on whether the terms of reference include all core functions, and whether those functions have been fulfilled through the year. For the first time this year, the committee self-assessment has been completed by officers and reviewed by the chair, and this is shown at Appendix A2 and summarised at 2.25 of the Appendix A report. In 26-27, i.e. this year, this self-assessment process will be advanced by the committee performing this self-assessment through one of its deeper dive sessions in November, and that's only 4 months away. But currently on this year's version, there is a action plan starting on page 258, and this has been produced to address the areas where the self-assessment identifies full compliance issues or improvements could be made relative to best practice. So this action plan will be reviewed by you, the committee, and potentially revised or enhanced at your November deeper dive session. The report ultimately concludes that the A&G committee has fulfilled its terms of reference, complied with guidance, and has contributed positively. Contributed positively to strengthening risk management, internal control, and governance arrangements in BCP Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and I think it's good practice that we now do this report for council, and it's good to see it evolving year on year. I think that it is a positive move to have this self-assessment, and I appreciate the fact that you filled this in the first instance, and then as a committee we will go through it and consider our assessment of that and the action plan. But it does seem quite straightforward and sensible and a good thing to do for me. I'd be interested to have the discussion on some of them around how the SIP for guidance sits with BCP's way of doing things and whether we're comfortable with where it departs. So any comments or questions? Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just on the self-assessment thing, there's part here about gifts and hospitality review. Are we going out Christmas party for the committee? Have we discussed that yet?
Not even sure what to say to that. I'm pretty sure SIPFA doesn't recommend a Christmas party, but defer to officers on that. Good. So I think that's in November. Then we'll have a deep dive where we discuss that self-assessment as a committee. Okay, good. So this one we have to vote on. So it is recommended that the Audit and Governance Committee consider and approve the annual report prior to its submission to Council on 13th of October 2026. Do we have a mover? Councillor Tarling. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Bartlett. All those in favour, raise your hands. So we have a unanimous vote for it. Thank you very much. Right, 15, Annual Governance Statement 2025-26 and Annual Review of the Local Code of Governance. Is that to you, Ruth?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the report bringing to Audit and Governance Committee the pre-audited or draft annual governance statement for your attention and approval, and also brings the annual update of the local code of governance. I just stress at this point that it is a draft version of the annual governance statement, which has recently gone out in the statement of accounts for public inspection, and it will be finalised with the statement of accounts later in the year. Until that point, it remains a draft, so if there are other comments or issues that come to light, these will be considered by corporate management team, and if any necessary adjustments are made in terms of additional items or other amendments, then those will be brought back to the to this committee for your approval prior to the inclusion in the final statement of accounts. So starting with the headline position that the annual governance statement process and the statement itself concludes that BCP Council has effective and fit purpose governance arrangements in place and in accordance with our governance framework. But as you would expect, and as we all know through the work of this committee, there are governance issues that we need to raise. So the process goes through looks at a wide range of sources of evidence, external and internal, and then a long list of potential issues is taken to Corporate Management Board, who identify, using the criteria in paragraph 11 as a framework, issues that it wishes to include in the annual governance statement. So this year there were 4 issues raised this year, and just to note that no issues from last year have been taken off Two have been amalgamated. The dedicated school grant and special educational needs and disability ones were separate last year, but they've been amalgamated this year because the action plans identified that we've discussed earlier it's the same action to address both of those issues, so they've been merged into one. So that's been combined and is our first issue. The second issue is the issue about mandatory training for counsellors, which remains as it did from last year. And there's been some additional actions identified this year to try and identify that one. The third issue is a new issue for this year, which is in relation to the governance of council-owned companies. And then the fourth issue this year, as we've mentioned a number of times this evening, is relation to corporate asset management, and specifically relation to asset conditions and how that may affect health and safety. Action plans have been agreed and put in place for all of these, and the detailed follow-up will come back to Audit and Governance Committee in January. That's not to say there aren't other issues that were discussed. A number of these, for example, unregistered placements, information governance, there are concerns relating to these and actions in place to officers to address them, but they didn't meet the threshold as that criteria earlier, and as I said, officers are expected to be addressing these areas of known weakness. You'll note some areas of the annual governance statement itself are in red, and that's to show you the difference between the annual governance statement that was included in the statement of accounts. There's been some updates since then to bring it in line with new SIT for guidance, and a couple of updates to the action plan as well. But just to be transparent that there is a difference between the version that went for public inspection. In terms of the local code, there's been some minor updates this year just to reflect new names of groups and boards and various things. And we've also included the assurance framework, which we bring annually to this committee for agreement, because that sits hand in hand with our governance arrangements. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. There are some areas that I think may need to be considered for inclusion in the AGS, which aren't included in this report. I'd like to just give them the headlines of these, and I'd like to request that Mr. Stannard reviews these, presumably with a view to take them to CMB if necessary, or see if they meet the applicable thresholds for inclusion. But the first one is the, and this is something that we're all aware of because we keep getting letters from residents about these issues. And the first one is about the non-compliance with the Section 5 and 5A of the Local Government and Housing Act of 1989, where the notification to all members is required if the council has contravened in law or is likely to make a contravention in law. And we are aware and have been made aware of several of these instances over the last few years. Now, I think, one way or another, we need to address this issue. I don't recall ever having a notification from the monitoring officer that we've had or are likely to have a breach in non-conformance with the law. If that is the requirement of the legislation, then we need to pay attention to it and make sure that's right. Coupled with that is potentially an amendment to the Constitution, which is not clear on the matter. And I would request also that the Constitutional Working Group also looks at the way the wording in our Constitution is to make sure that it's compliant with the Act. So that's the first one. The second one are and I think you've touched on it already, information governance. We get repeated complaints about freedom of information requests not being met in time. And I think this one probably needs to be assessed. I can't quantify it, I don't have the data on it, but we certainly get a lot of feedback from residents about these issues. In fact, I think we've even had some today. I think Mr. Redmond is one that's put that, and I think certainly Mr. Gagel has mentioned it, and I think probably Mr. McKinstry has probably made that comment in the past. That, you know, and it is a theme that keeps on cropping up. The next one is about oh yes, the public the amount of timescales for review of the AGS, the time allowed. We don't, and this again keeps cropping up every year, where the AGS is supposed to be published before the accounts in order for the public to an opportunity to review it. And this is part of legislation. And if we don't meet that, we're basically not conforming with the law. And we frequently do not meet that requirement. So that's another thing I'd like us to look at to see, you know, what is our performance? Is it being, you know, how often do we miss the timescales? You know, is this an issue that we need to address? I think it is, because I know that I've had lots of correspondence over a few years about this. Each year it seems to crop up. And again, Mr. Redmond has mentioned that in one of his statements today. The last one is a bit of a thorny one, and it's about the governance issues surrounding the Christmas event in Bournemouth Town Centre, where virtually the whole of the lower gardens was shut off. The development was put in place and carried on without any planning consent. And yet the planning application was submitted probably in May of that year, and the planning committee didn't actually consider it till after the development was in place and operating. So it was operating without any planning consent. Now, there are a whole raft of reasons behind why that occurred, but the upshot of it was it produced a huge amount of negative publicity and reputational damage to the council, in my view. And I've got a right to express that, I think, Councillor Cox. I see you shaking your head here, but if you had the access to the information that I've got about what transpired during that period, I think you'd probably be agreeing with me. There are some significant governance issues there. I'm not saying it has to go in the AGS, but I would really like Mr. Stannard to look at the issues and make some judgment on that, if you wouldn't mind. And I can give you the information that you will need in order to look at some of the issues. So that's my list of potential additions to the AGS. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stannard.
May I clarify one, Councillor Bartlett? The issue, or I think I heard you say that the AGS draft has not been made available to residents in public inspection period. Was that broadly right?
Yes, yes.
That was the case for 1 year of BCP's existence. I think it was 21, 22. I can't remember without looking it up. By the last years, I can categorically say the AGS has been made available in the public inspection period.
I understand that yes, I understand that, but it only gave them 2 days. It was made available within the timescale, but only gave them 1 or 2 days to make the comments.
For you, Chair, I think it's a slightly different issue. I don't want to dwell too much into the statements, but the statements were made around the public inspection of the accounts, not the annual governance statement. There's a time frame that's open that allows local electors to question and ask for records behind the accounts in that public inspection, the draft accounts.
I'm probably confusing both of those issues then, because I think that both areas have been commented on. So if I've confused the two, I apologise, but I do think there's an element in both of those issues.
Yes, thank you. I'm not aware of it being late in any recent years, but it's noted that it's draft, and any comments raised as to what should be incorporated in it, you will take away, you will consider, you will discuss at CMB, and make your deliberations before the final version. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I would like to make the point that this is very much a CMB document. You know, we're the vehicle that brings it to committee, but it's not internal audit's document. It's CMB's document. CMB have made the AGS by definition is a judgment document, and some people's judgments are going to be different. So I know for a fact CMB have considered those options but we will go back and say committee member has asked CMB to relook at those particular ones because there's a strong view that they should be, and we'll see what CMB think.
Do we have the opportunity to send you any further ideas we might have? If something occurs to us following this meeting, can we similarly let you know?
As Ruth said, it's draft until it's literally approved by the, we can make changes in, so if the accounts are getting signed off in November, you can make a change on the 28th of November if the account's being signed off on the 30th.
That is reassuring. A lot can come to light in that amount of time. Good. I'm surprised that the council-owned bodies issue is on there, but maybe I won't be after the deep dive. We have the update from them in September, so maybe this is a bit of a precursor to what they're going to tell us. Okay. With that in mind, we are agreeing the pre-audited annual governance statement, which is then. This is the pre-audited version that is going to be submitted to the external auditors, and then the final audited AGS will be published with a statement of accounts, so we can change it until then. So we're asking committee to approve the pre-audited AGS. So unless anyone has any final questions, it is recommended that A, the pre-audited annual governance statement 2025-26 is approved, subject to any comments received in connection with the public inspection of accounts. B, the annual update of local code of governance is approved. Do we have a mover? Councillor Andrews. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Tarling. All those in favour, please raise your hands. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, we have a unanimous vote. Thank you very much for that. Okay, item 16, appointment of independent members. This is a verbal update from you again, Samad.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee delegated appointment of independent members to a cross-party group comprising of Councillor Connolly. Remind me, Councillor Connolly, who else was on it?
Councillor Andrews,
Councillor Andrews,
Armstrong.
Councillor Armstrong. You interviewed 4 people, you offered it to 2 people, the report went to council on Tuesday night, council approved those 2 people, so they will attend formally on September the 3rd, the next non-core meeting, although we have been told one of those people can't attend in person, but we'll catch up online. I would think, Councillor Connolly, you wanted to say the names.
Oh yes, I just wanted to add. I wrote to them after the full council vote to congratulate them on now being appointed as members. They won't have done the onboarding in time for tonight, but they're invited from then on. And I encourage them to watch this evening's meeting so that they're up to speed. And their names are Katie Hewitt and Ilva Kana. And when they join, I'll ask them to introduce themselves, but they have relevant experience that we think would really add to the committee's skill set. So we're very excited to have them join us. So if you are listening, welcome. All right. Anything else on that? Fine. Last item, the forward plan refresh for the 2026-27 municipal year. So just a few comments on it. If you look at page, where are we? Page 301. So the next non-core meeting in September, we are going to look at council-owned companies, shareholder governance, which will be a presumably very interesting deep dive. And we're going to have a deep dive into procurement and contract management, which will again be very substantive. The one above it is risk management policy, and that's the children's services deep dive. And I'm going to suggest that instead of having a deep dive on that, we invite the director to come and join our discussion of the corporate risk register at the next core meeting, because I feel like in that discussion of the risk register, that might be a more appropriate place to give us a briefer update. And that will free up some capacity at that meeting for what I hope to be the Carter's Key report that we discussed previously. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I put in the chat for members a guide, LGA guide for councillors on procurement. If you wanted to read that prior to the deep dive into procurement, might be quite useful to refresh one's knowledge.
Thank you very much. That will be good. And I think this will be a really substantive discussion, particularly in light of today. So I look forward to that. So those are for the next deeper dive. I don't think we need to do the children's services deeper dive. I think we can move that to a core meeting and discuss it there. Was there anything else to update on for this item? I think... and there will also be an update from the Constitutional Review Working Group at the next meeting. For members of the public, the Constitutional Review Working Group does meet regularly, and we are progressing some proposals which we plan to bring to Audit and Governance Committee on various issues, and as and when we're able to, and there should be one at that meeting. And if any members of the committee would like to join the working group and aren't, please do let me know. Right, with that in mind, it is recommended that the Audit and Governance Committee approves the forward plan for 26-27 as set out in Appendix A. Do we have a mover? Councillor Tarling, and a seconder? Councillor Bartlett first. Do all those in favour of that item, please raise your hands. We have a unanimous vote for that. So with that, thank you very much for all those present, all those joining online. Have a good evening. Thank you.